What's up? Ghost Fictions is here, and we're back again. This is the second part of a story where QUIRKLESS Izuku was the wielder of the true spear of the biblical god, ELOHIM. But before we start, please consider subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Don't forget to check the description for more information. Now, let's get into part 2. Waking up inside of a small room, Izuku took in his surroundings as he stared at those who were keeping him in the room. He found Ria's Gremory sitting at her desk as she was overlooking her work for the territory, a blonde-haired boy who was working on making his weapon sharper with his skills. The perverted brown-haired boy who was keeping his eyes on his vice president of this clubroom from what he's seen, and a white-haired little girl looking at him as he groggily looked around. But the most important feature of the room was a blonde-haired girl staring at him in both awe as well as shame as she watched him closely. Sitting up from the couch, he looked around the room as he stared at those who were looking at him now that he was moving around. "Are you alright? You passed out on us back there?" Riaz asked as she checked on him. "Why, you didn't turn me into one of your peerage members, did you?" Izuku asked as Riaz shook her head at him. "Thank God, not that I hold anything against you all. I just would rather not leave Lady Gabriel's side. She was the one to save me from making a mistake in my life. Thank you all for keeping me from being taken advantage of," Izuku said as the young man stood back up and stretched his body. "Is there a way where you could ask Michiel something for me, Midoriya-san?" the blonde girl asked as Izuku looked at her. "What do you wish for me to ask Lord Michiel?" Izuku asked as he looked at the similar in height girl. "See, could you ask Lord Michiel if I could pray in general once more? If it's not too much to ask," the girl asked as Izuku thought about it. "What is your name?" Izuku asked as he showed his emerald wings once more. "Asia. Asia Argento," the girl said as Izuku nodded. "I will ask if you, Asia Argento, will be allowed to pray to God once more. I don't know what happened for you to not talk about God himself in your sentence, but I will ask Lord Michiel when I get there," Izuku said as he stood from the couch and walked over to the clubroom door. Turning back to the others, he looked at some of the other girls as they nodded at him as he waved goodbye, but not before hearing Issei say something as he left. "Finally, the love rival is gone," the boy said as Izuku chuckled to himself. As Izuku walked through the remains of the school, the young man looked for something that would inform him about who had arrived to take care of Kakebiel. From what he knew, that fallen angel Cadre was still alive when he used all his power on the man, especially the added power from Issei's boosted gear. He could still feel Kakebiel's presence in the world as he just shrugged it off as thinking he was still in the hands of Azazel as he made a magic circle to leave Kuo Town. But he made sure to make one last look at the school before thinking hard and using all the magic he could to restore the school back to its former look. As he stepped into the magic circle he made and disappeared from the school grounds. As he reappeared in the highest form of heaven during an important meeting between the leaders of heaven, Izuku noticed that they had stopped their meeting to look over at him. Did I come in at a bad time?" Izuku asked, looking slightly fearful for his life. "No, you came at the perfect time. Could you tell us what happened during the fight with Kakebiel?" Michiel asked as he looked softly at Izuku as the young angel walked over and kneeled over at them. The report from Kuo Town was that Kakebiel was searching to restart the Great War from thousands of years ago. He had stolen the Excalibur weapons so that heaven could be pinned for the blame of killing Serzich's Lucifer's little sister, as well as Seraphol Leviathan's little sister. Then he would have the fallen angels enter the battle in search of showing all factions that they were the better. But in the end, with the help of the devils of the Gremory peerage, we were capable of defeating Kakebiel with enough time to spare so that someone could arrive to prevent Kakebiel's escape," Izuku said as Michiel nodded his head as the archangel was about to send him away. "Lord Michiel, see, could I ask something of you?" Izuku asked as Michiel looked over at him once more with confusion. He could see the conflict in Izuku's form as well as read it from his facial expressions as the boy didn't know how to ask the question. "What do you wish to ask me, Izuku?" Michiel asked as Izuku looked at the man. "See, could you restore one Asia Argento's ability to pray to heaven? As she was excommunicated from the church because of a simple rule that she shouldn't heal a devil. But from what I can see, as she is having a much better time with them," Izuku said as he prepared for a punishment for speaking out of turn. That is a most considerate plea. I don't see why not," Michiel said as Izuku looked at him. "What?" Izuku asked, confused. "I don't see why I cannot allow an old follower of our faith to pray once more. It will take some time, but she will have her ability to pray once more soon. Does that answer your question?" Michiel asked as Izuku nodded as he left the leaders to talk. Once he was gone, Michiel looked at each of heaven's leaders as he spoke to them with the utmost urgency in his tone. "So if we are to prevent such a thing from happening again, we are to enter a treaty with each faction head within the Christian pantheon. We cannot fight amongst ourselves," Michiel said as all the other heads of heaven nodded their heads. We cannot allow ourselves to become weak because of infighting. If we are to show that we mean business about this treaty, we must send a few of our members into a devil's known territory. Uriel said, as he looked at the statistics of the human race. As much as it is against the rules God had made for all of us, I would prefer if we all worked together than as individuals. Raphael said, as he looked at those angels within the medical wing from his hospital in fourth heaven. What about you, Gabriel? Michiel asked, as the young woman thought about it. I would love to enter a treaty with the others within our pantheon, but should we allow others to enter our peace treaty? Gabriel asked, as Michiel gained a knowing look. Ah, I see what you are saying. We should bring other pantheons into our peace treaty agreement. Michiel asked, as Gabriel nodded. I can see why we should. We could gain allies in the event a massive war was to break out in the future, and we would need any and all allies we could use. Michiel said, as he nodded to himself. Alright, it's been decided. I will present the idea to the other faction leaders. If they accept these terms, we will need to bring a few members who can protect us on our mission to Kuo Town, to represent the area where we will bring peace to our factions. Michiel said, as Gabriel smiled with her brothers. Izuku was making his way back to the training grounds of Second Heaven as he ran into Marana as the female angel of hearts had run over to him. You're alive. I can't believe you stood against Kakebiel and fought against him using that magic ability I taught you. The girl said, pulling Izuku into her chest, causing him to blush. As they continued to talk about how the fight went between him and the devils against Kakebiel, they had run into Griselda as she was patrolling her zone of heaven. Hey Squirt. You came back. How was your first fight against a fallen cadre? Griselda asked, as Izuku thought about how he should answer it. It was dangerous, but at the same time I managed to land a lethal blow to him. But had it not been for someone else appearing at the end of the fight, I probably wouldn't be here. Also, there is something I need to inform you both about. Izuku said, as both girls looked at him. What is it? Griselda asked, as Izuku shyly showed his new set of wings. I think I got stronger after absorbing some power from the boosted gear wielder. Izuku said, as he shyly looked away from them after they saw his now 6 wings on his back. Alright, time to bring the training up to see where your new maximum power stands with 6 wings. Griselda said, as the trio ran over to the training facility in Second Heaven. They would be seen training for the remainder of the day as they were attempting to see the absolute limits of Izuku's newfound power that he unlocked with the help of the boosted gear. Once their training was complete, Griselda placed up a chart about his old set of wings of 4, as well as his previous stats that he held before the fight with Kakebiel. Well, from what I can see, you have been growing in power so astronomically that soon enough you might be as strong as a seraph by the time you are at least 18. So congratulations Izuku, you are a genius when it comes to collecting power, not to mention strategies against opponents. Griselda said, as Izuku blushed slightly from the praise, not used to it. Well, at least we know what the next step for our factions within the Christian pantheon is. Marana said, as Izuku looked over at her. What do you mean? Izuku asked, as the girl smirked at him. Hugging the boy close to her, she felt his body heat up as she giggled before looking into his eyes as he stared at her slightly embarrassedly. The next step from this event is to make a treaty with the other factions within our own pantheon, before moving on to make a treaty of peace with the rest of the world's pantheons. Marana said, as Izuku thought about it for a moment before agreeing with it. It makes sense, the simple fact that the Christian pantheon was walking on eggshells with one another is the main reason. They don't want to look like anything they do will cause a war between both of their enemies. Mutter mutter mutter. Izuku said, before devolving into his muttering spree. As Griselda looked at Izuku with a pointed look, Marana had a melancholic look on her face as she watched the boy mutter to himself about the possibilities from each pantheon entering the peace treaty that will come from this event. Midoriya, as much as I would love to hear you talk and mutter about the pantheons of other mythologies, we should get to training you some more. The stronger you are from yesterday, the higher the chance it will be to you becoming as strong as Lady Gabriel in the future. Griselda said, as Izuku blushed in embarrassment. Well, with that over, I think I should make my presence known then. A voice called out as it was revealed to be a young man. He was standing taller than Izuku, but just shorter than Griselda by just a mere inch as he had short blonde hair and was eating some food. Dulio, you shouldn't be eating that much food right now, what if you fall for bearing the sin of gluttony? Marana asked, laughing. Then I say so be it. I just love food so much. How can I not love eating the food I find from the human world? It's improved in its cooking abilities since I was last alive on Earth as a human. Dulio said, as the young man then looked over to Izuku. Getting back into his own training, Izuku started to wield his true longiness as Dulio watched over Izuku's progress whilst Marana and Griselda talked to one another. Izuku was moving faster than some of the weaker angels of heaven could see as they came by and watched a boy with his fierce training regimen that was given to him by Griselda when he first came here. You know, you would probably get better if you had an actual opponent to learn from as well as gain power from. Dulio said, as he appeared in front of Izuku's strike, causing the poor boy to scream in surprise. Hey Izuku screamed as he moved his spear out of the trajectory of the young man. Landing on the ground, Izuku looked over to Dulio, who was casually eating some more food as he watched a fear-stricken boy catch his breath. As he got back into a fighting stance to continue his training, Dulio had appeared in front of him, forming some light blades as he got into position. Ready for your training under me? Dulio asked, as Izuku looked at the young man in confusion. You not to sound completely oblivious to why your presence in heaven how strong, are why you? Izuku asked, as Dulio swung his blades around before leveling the boy with a soft gaze. Well, I guess since you are showing everyone in heaven how strong you are, then I guess I could do the same. Dulio said, as Izuku watched as 5 pairs of white wings appeared from behind Dulio's back. I can't help but think that I am willfully prepared for this. Izuku said, as Dulio chuckled. Don't worry, I won't be killing you, young man, just teaching you some things that I learned when I first came here as a young angel myself. Dulio said, as the two disappeared from the ground and appeared high in the air, clashing with their weapons of choice. They both moved across the skies as they attacked one another with their powerful strikes, as well as dodged blows that were too close to home. But with the fight dragging on, Izuku knew that his power just wasn't enough to fight Dulio, as the young man was barely putting in an effort to fight him. And Izuku was using all his power in physical fighting against the young angel, as he landed blow after blow in quick succession on him. Izuku's attire was becoming more and more ripped and torn, as he was then kicked in the back of the neck, sending him to the ground. As the ground erupted in a large amount of smoke and debris, Dulio landed near where Izuku had landed as he looked for the boy. Only to find him mid-swing of his true longiness on his lower back as he jumped out of the way and slammed a palm strike on the top of the boy's head, pushing him to the ground unconscious from the harsh strike to his head, rattling his brain, as the blood flow there had been too much and he passed out from the single strike itself. Well, that was a good fight, young man, how do you think you did? Dulio asked, not receiving an answer. Looking through the smoke and debris, he soon found out his reason why for not answering him. The young boy was completely unconscious from his strike. I didn't think I hit him hard enough to knock him out. Dulio muttered before Griselda and Marana had run over to him, checking him over for any harrowing injuries that would stop him from growing in strength. They let out a sigh of relief when they see everything was alright. How much power were you using against him? You know that he is only about 3 months old as an angel, right? Griselda scolded Dulio. Wait, he's only 3 months old as an angel. From how he fights, he was seeming like he was a veteran. Dulio said, as Griselda looked at him confusedly. What are you talking about? Marana asked, as she carried her younger angel in her arms. She couldn't help but coo at him when he instinctively curled up whilst sleeping, further in her arms as if he was a small kitten. Well, how do I say this? It's like he has had to fight many times before coming here. Dulio said, as he mentioned how the boy instinctively knew when he was going to attack from behind or above him, as if the boy had already had to fight for his life before. We need to inform Lady Gabriel about this development. If it's found out that he had to fight for his life before even becoming an angel, thing would look bad for him. Marana said, as they all flew to where Gabriel was floating in the sky. As the small group of angels were talking to Gabriel as she informed them about the upcoming meeting between Heaven, Grigori and the Underworld's devil clans, Izuku's body started to form a tattoo on his back in the form of a Siberian white tiger. As the leaders of Heaven tried to figure out what happened to Izuku, Dulio had come up and stated that he was sparring with a new young angel, believing that he was one of their veterans. They had been told that the way the boy fought was as if he was fighting for his entire life, and that was when Gabriel had informed the Mitchell's Joker that the boy was severely bullied in school, to the point of contemplating a sin. Once Dulio heard this, he was now even more worried about the boy's mental state, having fought Gabriel as well as some others, within the short time frame of being an angel, has got to have done something to his mentality. Gabriel informed him that she had kept an eye on his mental strength, and she was surprised to say the least about how mentally strong he was until his one moment of weakness when he found her in the church. Over time, the entirety of Heaven was told about the peace treaty that they would be having with the devils and fallen angels in order to stop the ceasefire that has plagued them for over the last 1,000 years since the Great War. And because of this peace treaty, some were okay with it, but others were not as good in terms of hearing about this kind of treaty happening. Izuku soon woke up from his impromptu nap from Dulio as he struggled to get up from the soft bed he was placed on as he got out of the bed. Looking around the small room he was inside of, he found the true Longina sitting right next to the bed as he placed his hands on it. He felt the pure energy that flowed through it and into his body as he absorbed the power of the spear into his body, causing the spear itself to slowly fade away from existence of being seen. Leaving the bedroom, he soon found himself staring at the chest of Griselda, as the woman had come here to see if he was alright. Looking up and away from the woman's chest, he saw her face smiling a little as she knelt in front of him before looking him over, making sure that he wasn't injured too badly. Well, at least Dulio had made sure that he didn't give you brain damage with that kick to your head a few hours ago. Anyway, you need to get ready. You will be one of the angels keeping an eye on Lord Michiel and protect him from any unsavory figures who wish to do harm to him during this meeting. Keep your spear out in the open to make sure that something does happen, it will be on hand. Griselda said, as Izuku nodded, willing his spear into existence. It was about a few minutes later that Izuku found himself standing next to a tan-haired girl who was looking like she was an exhibitionist for Jesus Christ. Who are you? Izuku asked, as the girl jumped around him. My name is Irina Shido. I am from the Vatican, who are you? I never saw you around in Japan before. Irina asked, as Izuku chuckled slightly. I guess I am slightly older than you are in terms of angelhood. Izuku said, before informing her of his circumstances of becoming an angel. You were saved by the Archangel Gabriel, that is amazing. I am so glad that Lord Michiel saw something in me to make me his ace. Irina said, as Izuku showed her his ace mark as well. Ace twinsies. She called out, bringing him in for a hug. Izuku felt his face blush into a crimson color as Michiel gained both of their attention as he turned around. Alright, you two, you have been chosen to keep me safe from anyone who wishes to do harm, as well as disrupt the meeting between the angels, fallen angels and the devils. Your mission is to keep me safe within the building and prevent those of our new forming allies die. Got it? The Archangel asked as he looked completely serious despite his calm exterior. Yes sir, Michiel. Me and Shido-san will make it our mission to keep you safe from all harm, even those who are technically our enemies in nature. Izuku said, stuttering a little at the end. But this meeting, I would hope that we aren't enemies soon afterwards, since you both will be heading to Kuo Academy as transfer students. Michiel said, as Izuku nodded. Stepping into the magic circle that Michiel made, Izuku and Irina had waited for the magic to work its stuff before they were teleported into a room where the leaders of each of the other two factions waited for them. As soon as Michiel had sat down, Izuku and Irina had stood behind their respective faction leader, with the devils standing behind their own leader. The meeting began without much fanfare as some of the devils looked at Izuku more closely as they had been happier to see him again. But there was a new face in the room for Izuku. He had never seen the original person who stopped him from killing Kakabiel in Kuo Academy's field, but this new face was showing a familiar energy that he felt that night. The man was wearing all black attire as he had silverish white hair, as well as the eyes were naturally blue in color. He had a more relaxed body expression as he was leaning on the wall behind himself and Azazel, who was now looking at Izuku, who found himself staring for a small moment before looking away. Michiel, could you introduce us to your angel companions behind yourself? I would like to know the young man who had managed to place Kakabiel in a spot of near death. Azazel asked, as the man smirked at Michiel. Looking behind himself, Michiel found that Izuku himself was sweating slightly as the other two heads of the devil faction were now looking at him. Well, I guess I should introduce you all to Lady Gabriel's newest ace since about 10 months ago. This is Midoriya Izuku. He was a devout churchgoer within Japan ever since he was 4 years old. We had the unsavory meeting with him when his mind was in a horrible place, and we gave him refuge within our ranks. Ever since then his mental strength had returned to what it was before he found our faction within the church he went to as a child. And this is Irina Shido. I'm pretty sure that the Red Dragon Emperor knows about her though. Michiel said, introducing the two angels behind himself. Izuku bowed when his name was called as he summoned the true Longinus into his left hand as the silver-haired young man looked at him intrigued. I thought the K-K-Kacchan was the wielder of the true Longinus. The silver-haired young man asked as Michiel looked over at him. Everyone within heaven thought the same, but apparently he had disappeared from the heroes faction. His presence being gone means that he is either dead or he had given up his sacred gear to someone else and it fell into our hands. Michiel said as the silver-haired young man nodded. Wait, true Longinus, what is that even? The brown-haired young man asked as he looked at his master. The true Longinus is a Longinus sacred gear that has killed gods in the past, but it is widely known as the spear that pierced through Jesus Christ. Ria's Gremory said as the young man nodded along. The meeting continued on as everyone talked about things they all wanted to change within the future, and that was when Azazel brought up the plans that all three were thinking about. So we all just going to continue to dodge around the question of peace between our factions. I'm getting sick and tired of not having a true answer to this kind of situation. Azazel said as he leaned back into his chair. Wouldn't we need to give something of ours to other factions in order to show that we are willing to create peace between factions? Michiel asked as the other faction leaders nodded. We could give our information on how to create more devils and give that information to both you factions so that you all could increase your numbers. the crimson-haired Satan said, as the smaller Satan nodded their heads. We at the Grigori can give you all the locations of each sacred gear wielder that we know of and give you all information about the sacred gears that are within our possession. Azazel said, as Michiel nodded. What about you, Michiel? What are you giving over to either of us to show a good sign of faith? The crimson-haired man asked. What are you all talking about? I already gave my gift to the Red Dragon Emperor. Michiel said, slightly smugger than usual. What did you give him? Azazel asked, as Izuku watched as the brown-haired young man walk up and reveal his sword. Ascalon. Izuku muttered to himself as everyone looked at him. Oh, so you've heard of the blade? The brown-haired young man asked. Yeah, it's highly regarded as a dragon-killing blade. You'd best be careful so that you don't accidentally hurt yourself with that blade. It is said to kill low-ranking devils with a mere scratch. Izuku said, as the other faction heads nodded along. As the group talked some more, Izuku kept himself looking out the window as the faction heads had finally placed some signatures on the paper when he noticed how the sky color changed from dark black to a purplish color. Moving over to Michiel, Izuku tapped the man's shoulder armor as he turned to look at him with confusion. What is it? Michiel asked as Izuku leaned over and whispered into his ear. There's a barrier forming above us, I think it's time for you to leave. Izuku said, pointing out the window. But just as he finished saying that, everything around them had frozen in time, and those who remained were those who were near a faction leader or a wielder of a sacred gear. What's going on? The Crimson Satan asked, as Izuku looked at him. We're being attacked, I have no idea who though. Izuku said, as the wall behind them exploded and caused some damage inside the room. But ultimately no damage to the occupants inside because of the three faction heads holding up a barrier to protect them all. Izuku walked over to the opening and saw a woman who was tan in color looking down at them all as she showed her 5 pairs of devil wings coming from her back as he glared hard at her. I have come here to prevent the treaty of the 3 factions from ever being completed. You will all die here and start a new war between the 3 factions. The woman called out as Izuku stepped out as she made a new spell to hit the faction heads once more. As soon as the blast came towards the faction heads, Izuku jumped in the way, creating a massive barrier blocking the attack and sending it back at the woman who dodged out of the way. Revealing his now 4 pairs of angelic wings, Izuku stared the woman down as she glared harshly at him. Why are you trying to fight me, weakling? I am here to kill the faction heads, not someone who is trying to play hero. She called out as Izuku formed his spear. I am here to protect Lord Michiel, as well as those he now sees as allies. That includes those who are of the Grigori as well as the underworld devil faction. Izuku said as he spun his spear around and pointed it at the woman. As they glared at one another, nobody even noticed how the Crimson Satan was talking to his little sister and had them go off to save one of her own peerage members with the Red Dragon Emperor. Izuku then flew towards the newcomer as she blasted him with water dragons as he pierced through them with the true longinus and flew towards her. They would both clash in the sky, creating a massive shockwave that blew some chunks of the ground up into the air as they clashed many times faster than the brown-haired young man could keep up with. They start the video at the top of the story here so that you all can get the start of their conversation and get into the fight. Izuku and the woman flew through the air as they clashed and traded blows with one another. The young man had launched a few light-based attacks on her, causing some light damage on her. Using his experience of fighting someone who had been fighting since the Great War between the 3 factions, he increased his speed as well as timed his strike in order to land on her arm. Once the woman had gotten herself in a position to attack with a water dragon again, she launched her power at him as Izuku pierced through the water and seemingly was consumed by the water. She began to laugh at him as he pierced through the end of the water dragon and flew faster towards her as she finally noticed how close he was getting to her. And once he was upon her, she was leaning over to her right as Izuku slammed his spear over her body and sent her to the ground whilst taking off her left arm. As she got up from the ground, Izuku landed on the ground before he charged some new light spears and threw them at her in order to not let up his attacks on her and make sure that she makes more mistakes. Flying towards her whilst hiding inside his light spear barrage, the woman had then got angry and released her aura, which destroyed his barrage of light spears and revealed him to her as he thrusted his spear towards her through the aura. He had watched as she was forced to block the attack with her remaining arm, but he was able to move his body around hers in order to place himself behind her and created a light spear once more and pierced it through her lower abdomen. As she screamed in agony, she turned her body around and backhanded Izuku as he flew back towards the faction heads as if he was a ragdoll. Standing back up from his position on the ground, he found the woman flying towards him after having eaten some weird black magic serpents as he spun his spear around once more as he flew towards his opponent again. As the woman launched the same attacks over and over again, Izuku noticed it was as if she never learned any new magic and just spammed the one that didn't have the largest amount of magic drain. He then gained the idea of showing his full magic potential as he flew up into the air, causing the woman to chase after him. To those who created the human race, I pray to thee. Give me the body of the first man ever created by God and bless it with enough power to protect me from all evil. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. Izuku said, as his entire body was slowly becoming encompassed by an earthly giant of a human being filled with pure light energy. By the time the woman appeared in front of the giant's face, she was then covering her face as the eyes of the giant revealed itself to be giant emeralds. Moving its left arm, it slammed the woman into the ground as it growled at her before placing a finger on her left leg, before crushing it under all the weight it could, causing another scream of agony to appear. But that was when she smiled psychotically as she stared to glow ominously, and Izuku felt that if she were to release that magic right there, it could endanger the area and those within it. And so Izuku did the only thing he thought he should do, he grabbed the woman with his hands and covered her within his giant hand. As an explosion happened from her position in his giant hand, he felt the giant's energy start to become tainted as he forced himself out of the giant's skin. Once he left the body of Adam, the first man God created, Izuku cancelled the magic spell as it started to fall apart, revealing a sweating woman underneath with only her upper portion of her body remaining. It was fully clothed though as Izuku stared at her as she was bleeding from her waist, as it was seemingly never ending as the woman glared hard at him. You think that was the end of me? I will have you killed where you stand. Kill him, magicians. She called out as she used magic to reform her legs and left arm. Izuku watched as he was surrounded by magicians as they prepared their magic spells against him in an effort to try and kill him. Using his magic, he disappeared from sight and reappeared in front of the faction heads as he looked at them. That was a good fight, young man, you really showed her who's boss, but let this old man take her on. As you are right now, you wouldn't last much longer with how low your magic reserves are at. Azazel said as he walked forward. Flying towards the woman, he got into a fight with the woman as Izuku looked at Michiel for any orders as he looked at him. Protect the devils of this town as well as keep the magicians away from the Red Dragon Emperor. Michiel said as both he and Irina had left their positions to assist the devils with the destruction of the magician army. Izuku flew towards where Akeno and Kiba were taking down magicians left and right as he activated his true Longinus's ability to create a light-generated weapon of his choice. As he worked with them, Ria soon arrived with Kaneko and Gasper, who assisted in the fight with the Red Dragon Emperor in order to push back the magicians with the help of the White Dragon Emperor. It would take some time, but the magicians would be pushed back to retreat and escape without the person who led them there. By the time the group had returned back to the sides of their respective leaders barring one, they soon came up to the ending of a final battle with a leader of a small army of forces who they would soon come up against in the future. They soon found Azazel without an arm and staring down his enemy as she powered up as much as possible in order to destroy the man once and for all with a self-destructive attack. Once Azazel forced himself to slice off one of his arms in order to save himself, the opponent who he was fighting had exploded in a massive blast of energy. Landing down near the other three faction leaders, Azazel looked at his audience as he did take notice of one of the fighters who was looking worse for wear. How is the little angel doing, Michiel? He seems to be out of it at the moment. Azazel questioned as Michiel looked over at Izuku. The young man was seemingly sweating a whole lot, not to mention that he was barely standing on his feet as he leaned on his true Longinus spear in order to stay standing upright. Walking over to the young angel, Michiel placed his hand on Izuku's left shoulder as Izuku looked up at him, whilst Irina and Zenobia looked at them both with trepidation. You've done your job, young man, our enemies are gone. Rest now. Michiel said as Izuku allowed his eyes to droop for a second before shaking his head. I will only feel like you're safe when we're back in heaven. Izuku said as Michiel nodded his head. What the Archangel did next shocked everyone as he raised his hand and chopped the nearly unconscious boy in the neck, causing him to stiffen from the shock, and as his wings drooped more now, his body stiffened before relaxing as Michiel stopped him from falling to the ground. Whilst that happened, another fight took place between the Red Dragon Emperor and the White Dragon Emperor. The resulting battle left the White Dragon Emperor to run away with his metaphorical tail between his legs and the Red Dragon Emperor with an injury to his pride at not having been able to stop the bastard with his current power. Once the group left the area, Michiel, Irina and Izuku were teleported back into heaven as Michiel returned Izuku back to Gabriel, who looked over his unconscious body with fear that he had fallen in battle. Once Michiel told her about what really happened and that Izuku was just extremely exhausted from the battle that took place after the treaty was signed. He also told her about how Izuku took notice of what was happening outside the building they were signing the papers before anyone else did. He commended the young angel for his perseverance in order to keep him safe from their foes who came to prevent the treaty from being made. They all would sleep easy that night, believing that their peace was going to come much faster than they would predict. Oh, how wrong they were in future hindsight. Izuku felt himself in a dreamlike state. Looking around the place, he soon found himself within a small room looking at a television screen as he stared through it. Walking over towards a couch, he sat down as he thought about where he was. Soon something turned on the television as Izuku stared at the screen. It was showing him as a 4-year-old moving through a small forest with his old friend, who just turned out to be just like everyone else who left him because of his quirkless status. Little Izuku was running through the forest as he tried to keep up with his best friend, at least at the time. He finally managed to catch up to his best friend, Kacchan. The boy was everything that Izuku had wanted to be but couldn't. The boy was confident in his abilities even as a 4-year-old with only a few months of using his quirk. He was determined, powerful, as well as very smart for his age. The younger Izuku had finally stood next to his best friend as they came across a wet log from the rainy day they had 2 days ago. It had seemingly stayed wet with all the moss all over it. "I will be crossing this log as my first adventure as a hero," Kacchan said as he started to walk over it. "K-K-Kacchan, I don't think it's safe to walk across it," Izuku warned as he was worried. His worry was well placed as not even a few seconds after Kacchan had told him off, his foot slipped on the moss of the log, causing him to lose his confident face as he let out a girlish screech, landing in the small creek. "Kacchan!" All the kids screamed out as they looked at the small creek below. The boy had come up from the water as he spat out some moss and some sediment from the water. "I'm fine, you bast," Kacchan said before he was interrupted by Izuku running over to him. "K-Kacchan. Hey, are you alright?" Izuku screamed out as he ran down the small hill and into the small creek with a hand outstretched. The young boy stared at Izuku's outstretched hand as Izuku asked one more time. "K-K-Kacchan, are you alright?" That was a big fall. Izuku worried as Kacchan's face went from the deadpan smile on his face to a scowl immediately. "I don't need your help, worthless Deku. What are you doing looking down on me like that?" Kacchan screamed in Izuku's face, pushing him into the water himself. Izuku felt tears forming in the edges of his eyes as he felt Kacchan's words hurt him deeper than any burn the boy could give him. "Just leave me alone, Deku, at least then you can live your life as a useless fuck," Kacchan said as he left Izuku there. "Wait, Kacchan. That was mean," Izuku called out, getting himself out of the water. "Why, you shouldn't curse like that. Don't leave me behind," Izuku called out, running after his old friend. The scene changed again to him being near the end of elementary school as Izuku was running down a road from his bullies. He had been abused by them on the daily ever since he had tried to make sure Kacchan had been okay after falling into the creek a few years back. The boy for some reason thought that Izuku had been looking down on him when he merely wanted to make sure that he was alright. But as of right now, Izuku couldn't focus on the why as he was being chased by Kacchan and his lackeys. He ran down a small alley as he found himself at a dead end, hearing the sounds of his bullies coming down after him. Turning around, having enough time to run away, Izuku had ran back to the street to find Kacchan and his lackeys still running to catch up to him. Shivering in slight fear, he hesitated before turning around and running down the road once more, not even bothering to see where he was running. Eventually he had run into a hero who was doing a patrol, as the man had looked at Izuku with alarm as well as confusion. "Hey, are you alright?" the hero asked. The man wasn't that intimidating though. He looked like a fusion between Ingenium as well as All Might. He was tall and buff, but seemed fast enough to catch a fleeing villain. Please stop them. I think they're going to kill me," Izuku called out as the man stared at him again. "What is your name, kid? That's a heavy accusation you're making," the hero asked as Izuku pulled out his identification card, albeit very hesitant. As soon as the hero had looked at his card, he noticed that the boy was quirkless, and that was all it took to set the hero off as he glared hard at Izuku. "To think that your kind are still around, you'd best go find someone else to help you, since I am not helping a quirkless runt. You bastards are literally the worst of the bunch," the hero said, walking away from Izuku. But the time the man took talking to Izuku had allowed Kacchan to catch up, and Izuku had barely managed to dodge an explosion to the back. As he continued to run away, Izuku's trust in most authority figures were lost with that very hero, so he wouldn't trust any hero nor teacher with anything. Especially since the teachers don't even stop Kacchan when he tries to hurt him at the school itself. Izuku had also met a police officer as well in that same day with a hero, and they even told him to scram. Needless to say, at the end of the video, Izuku saw himself being blasted by explosions again. As each explosion rang out, he flinched horribly. Once the memories were complete, he found his dreamscape slowly becoming a white sheen, believing that he was waking up. Izuku was right in his assumptions, as when he woke up he found himself on the bed that was gifted to him in Heaven's Hearts building. Sitting up from his bed, Izuku could only have one singular thought about what kind of dream he had. What caused me to dream about that? Izuku was in the library within third heaven as he was studying for the upcoming test of courage within heaven. They were sending angels into a place where Gilgamesh had once gone through to gain his powers of being at least a 2/3 god and 1/3 human. Izuku was studying the old hero's skills and abilities within magical constructs, but one thing stuck out to him as the man's face was oddly familiar to him. Gilgamesh had a face that was entirely smug from whatever perspective you looked at his image. The man had a seemingly bored look in his eyes, as his smile was almost entirely arrogant. He had blonde hair as well as red eyes as he stared at Izuku through the book, and Izuku read the man's abilities. He had the ability to create magical portals into his very own treasury, to pull out weapons he had collected over the many millennia of his time as king of Mesopotamia. Not to mention he could copy any blade he set his eyes on and turn each one into one of his many noble phantasms. But the one weapons that he held in much higher regard in his arsenal was a blade that was created by him in order to destroy many enemies in one fell swoop. As well as a magical book where he could use any first-rate magic within it that allowed him to increase his own power and skills with a blade of any weapon. As Izuku kept studying about the hero, he never noticed how a certain angel had been leaning over him watching him take notes on the old hero, who had been long dead for multiple millennia. "Wow, you sure do mutter to yourself. I never knew that I'd be subjected to one of Midoriya's famous muttering sprees." A feminine voice called out from behind him. Just from the sound of the voice, it caused a downright horrified expression on Izuku's face as he jumped into the air and landed on the roof of the library, and he hugged the chandelier tight as his eyes were pinpricks as he shivered in fear. It was here that a disembodied head floated up to him as it laughed at his expression before apologizing to him. Sorry. I didn't mean to jump scare you to the point you'd hide up here," the girl said as Izuku stared at her disembodied head. Is that why your quirk?" Izuku asked in a small whisper. "Yeah, it allows me to split my body in many pieces and I can still use them all at once. Nice to meet you, I'm Satsuna Tokichi. 10 of clubs from Lord Raphael." Satsuna called out as Izuku nodded and reached a hand out to shake her now disembodied hand. "Well, are you going to detach yourself from the chandelier or should I get someone to pull you away from it?" Satsuna teased as Izuku merely let go of it as he floated down with his wings. "Wow, people weren't kidding, your wings really are emerald in color," Satsuna said as Izuku blushed. Well, I didn't wish for that to happen," Izuku mumbled before putting his notebook away. "Aw, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. I just wanted to see why they are emerald in color," Satsuna said as Izuku slowly sat down and kept his wings out. Satsuna stared at them for a moment before placing her hand on them. There was so many emerald feathers that she was having the time of her life. Unknown to her though, she was seriously arousing the boy since they were extremely sensitive to him. "Wow, I never knew that another angel's wings would be so soft," Satsuna called out as she had rubbed his feathers even faster. Izuku instantly moaned a little too loud as Satsuna and some other angels had turned their heads over to find whoever released such a sound within heaven. Satsuna was the first to look down at Izuku, who had a blushing face and was trembling a little too much as the girl stopped her rubbing. Looking at his wings now, she was wondering why they weren't turning black from the completely erotic sound from the young man. Are you okay? I didn't mean to do that to you," Satsuna said as the other angels looked at Izuku as if he had broken one of the many rules of heaven with his moan. No. I think I should just leave," Izuku said, standing up and flying away from the area as someone else came up to Satsuna from behind. "You know, that is the first time someone had touched his wings in that manner. He is extremely defensive of them because of their odd color, but the simple fact he allowed you of all people to touch them is an achievement," Griselda said, causing Satsuna to look at her. "What are you talking about?" Satsuna asked as Griselda chuckled. "I don't know why, but whenever you touch Izuku's wings, he gets incredibly aroused. It's like scratching a cat's stomach enough times that it will get extremely aroused," Griselda said as Satsuna nodded. "So I gave him a hard-on from just messing with his wings?" she asked as Griselda nodded. "I so need to apologize for that, I didn't mean to get him like that," Satsuna said as Griselda shook her head. "You won't be able to find him once you arouse him. He will be in the men's showers for at least a few hours in order to get the nasty thoughts he gets from his arousal out of his system," Griselda said as Satsuna looked at her. "What is he taking a cold shower? Maybe you shouldn't look for him is all I'm saying," Griselda replied back before leaving. Izuku was exploring heaven to do anything to get his mind away from Satsuna and how she had clearly accidentally aroused him from rubbing his wings too much. He was so focused on trying to think of something else he never noticed himself entering a part of heaven that was off limits, the trials of Jesus Christ. As he walked through the small rooms of the trials of Jesus Christ, he had never noticed that he was all alone within the place as he thought about everything. By the time he had found out that he wasn't somewhere that there was angels, he looked at the place in confusion as well as awe. They eventually found a tomb where there was a small coffin within that was covered in small shrubbery, and as soon as he moved some of it off it revealed a small name that he could barely read in Hebrew. Jesus Christ. Oh shoot. I'm not supposed to be here. Izuku called out, and just as he turned around to leave the Flora had appeared behind him and pulled him into the ground. Wait. I'm not supposed to be here. Izuku called out as he appeared in a small dungeon. Taking this chance to see if he could contact Gabriel, he soon found out that the place was covered in magic that would prevent him from contacting the outside world. Sighing in sadness, he continued his walk around the place as he looked at all the artifacts that Jesus Christ had collected during his time alive on Earth. But out of all of them there was one that seemed to be alive more than the rest. The entire tomb was appearing to wield so much power that Izuku couldn't imagine it. It was here that a new person's voice appeared to him. "Hello child, it's been so many years since someone has come here." A voice called out behind him. Turning around, Izuku saw a vestige of a man wearing white robes. His brown hair and beard was the most noticeable thing about him. Who are you?" Izuku asked, as the man merely smiled at him as a small halo appeared above his head, as well as his true long-eye spear suddenly appeared in front of himself. "My name is Jesus Christ child. I am here to inform you that you were specifically chosen to take on the single challenge of my tomb. You are to attain the sacred gear and transform it into something that you can use to both protect and attack your enemies and allies," Jesus said, as his vestige said, as it flickered. How is this place a sacred gear? I thought that was impossible," Izuku said, as Jesus smiled at him. "Nothing is impossible in the eyes of the earth. She protects us from everything, but at the same time, we completely destroy her. With this sacred gear, if you manage to bond with it on a spiritual level, can allow one to theoretically protect everything. It has the abilities to create massive reality marbles, as well as barriers that can protect what you love most, as well as your allies and yourself from any and all harm." But I already have the true long-eyeness. How can I have a use for another sacred gear?" Izuku asked, as the man smiled even more. "The simple fact that you are thinking of others proves in and of itself that you are the right one to wield this power. I call this sacred gear the Tomb of Christ. It allows one to create any kind of magical barrier, as well as reality marble to suit its user, and I am giving it to you. I want you to become something that even God couldn't do with me. I want you to become the successor to God himself and lead our faction into a new age of peace. Our foes will come from any and all places within the earth and underworld. But there is a new group of enemies that are building up their forces. I cannot inform you since that will be breaking fate and what it has set up. But it must be prevented at all costs," Jesus said, as Izuku nodded. Once the tomb began to glow, Izuku felt himself glowing as well before looking at the vestige of Jesus Christ, only to find the man nowhere to be seen as he felt a massive pain in his chest and body as a whole. Collapsing to the ground in pain, Izuku held a hand over his rapidly beating heart as he felt his whole body burning, as if it was evolving to house something else. And within the next hour of Izuku's pain grunts before screaming out loud, everything in the tomb had exploded with a massive power that Izuku had never felt before. By the time the glow had ended, Izuku laid on the ground in massive amounts of pain as he started to cry from the amount his body burned from the feeling of his body being changed. As soon as he opened his eyes, he soon found Gabriel looking at him in worry as she found him lying on the ground and picked him up. "Are you alright Izuku? You've been missing for around 2 weeks." Gabriel called out as Izuku just pointed at the Tomb of Christ. "You went in there? How did you survive?" Gabriel asked as Izuku stared at her eyes before she gasped. What's wrong?" "NGH?" Izuku asked before grunting in extreme pain. Gabriel had then decided to ultimately take Izuku to Raphael, as the man would take a look at his body's structure, as well as the sacred gear attached to his soul. "Wow, this is amazing. He's completely assimilated Jesus Christ's original sacred gear into his body and soul. This has never happened before, much less in history of a human even being capable of wielding a multitude of powers. Much less sacred gears. He's assimilated Jesus Christ's sacred gear of Tomb Savior," Raphael said as he fanboyed over the sacred gear a little. "Raphael, please fanboy later, my ace is having struggles breathing as well as is in great pain. Help him," Gabriel said, yelling at her brother. "Sorry, I was just excited about this. Anyway, what are you feeling young man?" Raphael asked as Izuku informed him everything that he felt. All you need to do is rest. Maybe have some cold water rags over your chest and forehead. That way you can cool down, other than that it seems you're healthy as they come," Raphael said as Izuku soon passed out from the pain he suffered from. On count to either Gabriel or Raphael, Mitchell watched from a small distance as he looked at Izuku's aura. It was changing a lot as it was seemingly forming a new set of wings for the boy, as if to support his new sacred gear's power. It seems like Jesus has chosen a new guardian of heaven. I just hope nothing bad happens to him further down the line. Michiel muttered to himself, unaware that Setsuna was standing next to him with a confused face. Izuku had woken up from his slumber. He had been wondering about what had happened back in the tomb of Jesus Christ. And now that he could feel around his body, he felt like he was more dense, more defensive in terms of body density. As soon as he sat up from the hospital bed inside Fourth Heaven, Izuku looked around the room to find Gabriel sitting in a seat not far from him. As he stood up from the bed and moved over next to her. Sitting down in the seat next to her, he leaned on her left shoulder as the angel had been sleeping still. It wouldn't be until a little bit later that Gabriel would wake up from her slumber to find Izuku leaning on her shoulder with a conflicted look on his face. "What's wrong, Izuku?" Gabriel asked, as Izuku looked up at her. I don't know what caused me to walk into Jesus Christ's tomb. I didn't watch where I was walking and ended up in there. But I think I have Jesus Christ Sacred Gear Savior's barrier. Izuku said, as Gabriel had nodded along. You may have broken a law within heaven to go in there. I believe that you entering the room was something that we had been waiting for. No angel had been able to enter and leave it unscathed, even you weren't able to escape without anything wrong with you. Gabriel said, as she pulled Izuku into her very generous bust for a hug. Izuku leaned into the hug more than he thought he should as he wrapped his arms around her, as he loved having these moments between him and Gabriel. Her hugs were always good reminders about his mother's hug she used to give him, and thinking about her got him sad again, as tears were brimming to the surface of his eyes again. Gabriel noticed his saddened look as she could only guess that her hug was giving him a small memory of his own mother's embrace. Rubbing her hands through his hair, she let him cry it out for a small moment before he regained his emotions and brought them under control once more. They had him checked over by Raphael in order to see if he was alright completely in body as well as mind. Once he was given a clean bill of health, they had left over to where Uriel had been making some new modifications to the sacred gear research he was doing. Uriel, can we talk for a moment? Gabriel called out to her brother. Turning around, Uriel noticed that Izuku was next to her as he pulled them both into the room where he was conducting research on sacred gears. They all sat there as Uriel had told them to see what happens when they activate the new sacred gear that is tethered to Izuku's soul. Once feeling out for his sacred gear, Savior's barrier, Izuku felt a massive barrier being placed over the room, as well as heaven as a whole. It wasn't much longer before a vestige of a fallen angel had appeared before them, as it was a memory of the previous wielder of Savior's barrier. So it seems as if you managed to figure out to use this power. I'm glad that its power is in the hands of such a heroic soul. This sacred gear, Savior's barrier, is so powerful that it could defend its host against the most powerful blast that God himself could conjure up. And not even he could destroy the barrier without any help of those who were more powerful than he was. Anyway, my name is Azazel, and I was the last known person who did some research on this sacred gear when I was still in heaven. Nice to meet you though. The younger Azazel said, before he disappeared. Once their little training session with Izuku learning how to turn on the barrier as well as turn it off, they all left Uriel's office. Now young man, make sure that if you are to ever use this power, it must be used to protect yourself as well as those who you wish for it to protect. It responds to a desire, not a want. Now that your little sparring session is done, you must leave. I have experiments to conduct. Uriel said, as he left the two near second heaven. Once the two left the area and went over to where Izuku had last been seen reading Gilgamesh's legend, Gabriel had picked up the book. I never thought that you'd be someone interested in Gilgamesh's legend. What brought this up, Izuku? Gabriel asked, as Izuku looked away. I was thinking about what happened between me and Vivali. How I couldn't hold him off very long before Issei was forced to enter the fray. I at least want more weapons at my repertoire so that I don't have to rely on the true longinus. Izuku said, as Gabriel nodded her head. You are aware of where Gilgamesh's tomb is located in the world, right? Gabriel asked, as Izuku shook his head. Well, it is located in the Yucatan Peninsula. Near the ruins of the Aztec pyramids. You should move about a few miles to the right of them, and in the ocean waters of the Gulf of Mexico, you will find it there. Thankfully you can breathe in the water as an angel, so you could be able to enter the water without any injuries to your health. Make sure to return with your lesson of the place. Gabriel said, as Izuku nodded and gave her a hug. Once they pulled away from their respective hug, Gabriel watched as Izuku disappeared in a mode of bright white light as she smiled at his descension to earth. So where is he going this time? A familiar voice asked, as Gabriel looked behind her to see a familiar face. He's going to find Gilgamesh's tomb. Gabriel said, as she watched him from above. Izuku landed in the Yucatan Peninsula as he moved over to the Aztec ruins within the small state within Mexico. As soon as he found the Aztecan ruins, he moved over to the right of the ruins and flew through the sky in search of Gilgamesh's tomb. Once he neared the ocean water of the Gulf of Mexico, he touched down before moving down through the water, walking on the sandy ground of the water. Threading through the ocean waters, he found himself connecting with the marine life as they swam around him, looking at him with curiosity. Reaching his arm out, he pet some of the marine life, sharks, dolphins, whales and much more as he made his way to where the tomb lay. By the time he arrived at the tomb underwater, he smiled to himself as he entered the tomb of Gilgamesh with low expectations. Walking through the tomb, he found hieroglyphics in a different language from the time that was during both the Aztecs as well as many other nations within that time frame. Looking at the language though, he can't help but mutter out a single nation that this language belonged to. Mesopotamian, the language of Gilgamesh, the world's first true hero. Izuku muttered in awe as he looked at the created imagery words. Placing his hand on the wall and moving it across the hieroglyphics, he made his way all the way down into the deeper parts of the tomb. It wasn't until he was near the bottom that he hit a small roadblock of sorts in the form of a sphinx. It moved around the water robotically as it searched for the intruder to the great tomb of the old hero. Looking at the angel in front of it, the sphinx growled at Izuku before shaking its head at Izuku as it spoke in a warbled sound. "Angel you may be, but your kind is not allowed within the tomb of Gilgamesh," the sphinx said as Izuku thought about the wording. "I may be an angel of the Lord. But I was born human. I became an angel because I wasn't in the right place. I was considering taking my own life before becoming an angel. All my life I had wanted to become a quirkless hero in this age of heroes. But nobody even believed in me. Not even the notes I took on heroes and villains about how they could increase their capabilities of their quirk usage, as well as counters," Izuku said as he looked at the sphinx as it looked shocked. "You were a quirkless human in a world of quirks?" the sphinx asked as Izuku nodded. "Who informed you that your dream of being a quirkless hero was incapable of being completed? Anyone can be a hero, you just need to train yourself to become that in mind, body and soul. What you had trained yourself in was both mind and soul. You had forgotten to prepare your body for the heroism you would have to face on the field of battle. How can you become a hero if you do not learn how to protect yourself?" the sphinx asked as Izuku opened his mouth before closing it. I was just wishing to become like everyone else. And now that I am an angel of God, I realize that the way I was training my mind as well as soul to become a hero wasn't all of what I should have done. The way I increased in power in the short time I was an angel showed me my faults. The simple fact that I never prepared physically cost my chance to become a hero," Izuku said as the sphinx smiled at Izuku. This talk with the sphinx was very alarmingly showing the hubris that Izuku had been following until the moment he contemplated taking his own life. "All life is precious, even mine. No matter what I do, I have to make sure I myself am protected from any and all harm so that those I protect and save can feel safe with my presence alone," Izuku muttered. "Protect those you love or protect the lives of those who do not know you? Who do you protect?" the sphinx asked as Izuku thought about the answer. "I would try and protect both. Depending on who's closer to me, I will attempt to protect both by learning how to become strong enough that I will be able to turn that ultimatum into a choice of not who do I choose, but if I will save them or not," Izuku said as the sphinx looked at Izuku's eyes. "You can move on to the next trial. But be warned, this one will be of the mind, not of the soul," the sphinx said as Izuku entered the small room. Walking in the dark hole of the abyss, Izuku looked around the place. He continued down the path, believing that it was something he needed to do. It wasn't until he found himself in a position again that was nearing unconsciousness that he sat on the ground and entered a meditative state. Once inside the recess of his mind, Izuku looked around as he found the sphinx once more standing before him with a mirthful smile on its face. "Found me you have, faster than expected. But this riddle is not for your body or soul, but the mind," the sphinx said as Izuku looked at the sphinx with trepidation. As Izuku looked around the area, he soon found himself in the church where he had first met Gabriel, the moment he regretted the most in his life. The part of his life where he seriously contemplated listening to his old friend Kacchan and ending his own life in order to see if he could gain a quirk in his next life. You feel inadequate, your strength is not enough. But no matter what you do, you feel as if you are not what Gabriel of Heart's Ace should be. Why? The sphinx asked as Izuku looked at it. The others within Gabriel's suit of her deck, they have powers that I don't have, quirks to aid them in their endeavors with their foes. Meanwhile, my quirklessness, it makes me feel as if I shouldn't even be alive. I don't even know what Gabriel-sama even saw in me. I want to make her proud of making me her ace, but I feel as if I make one mistake that I will be tossed away and forgotten," Izuku said as his lips trembled. Tears brimming to the surface as his greatest fear inside his heart was shown, his fear of being discarded and forgotten by everyone. He had been having dreams lately where people around him had been abandoning him, all because of the fact that he was either too weak or didn't have a power of his own before becoming an angel. The one he had that caused him this great amount of pain was how he always had his brain giving him a dream where Gabriel had lost faith in his power as one of her suit and decided to get rid of him herself. The way she got rid of him was extremely graphic for him, as every single dream it happened, she got more and more creative with the ways she could end his life. purging his soul from existence, pulling apart his wings that he earned through hard work and dedication, tearing him from limb before finally placing a light spear, sword, arrow, etc. through either his head or heart. They continued to get worse over time, but now that he was alone, he could now remember every single way and he couldn't name anything else, or else he would get sick. But the worst one that he would always remember was how she would completely berate him like Kacchan did before, using light in a way like the boy and burning his body completely but not killing him. Sending him to the fallen angels to corrupt him and make him fall and enter their ranks before sending an assassin to kill him. His mind then started to deteriorate as he fell deep within his own terror and fear of what could happen if he didn't make Gabriel proud. You have a fear of inadequacy, a fear of being rejected, as well as a fear of abandonment. Tell me, what have the angels done to make you feel as if you would be tossed aside the moment you aren't useful to them anymore? The Sphinx asked, as Izuku thought about everything. I don't have anything to say about that. It's ingrained in my mind that no matter what I do and nobody would ever like me. That I will always be useless to Gabriel-sama. Izuku said, as he thought about everything Kacchan told him. The Sphinx was very patient as he watched Izuku spiral down into the depths of his mind. It was very disturbing how one small individual who had been apparent through the entire memories that flowed through the boy. One boy had made this boy so incredibly clingy to others, hopeful to have friends, not to mention extremely cautious towards those who do get close. For the fear of rejection and abandonment. Placing one of its paws over Izuku's head, it caused the boy to stop hyperventilating as he looked up at the creature. Ingrained it is, but fixed it can be. Gabriel is an archangel who has many powers within the heart as well as the mind. Tell her these things, why do you not? The Sphinx asked. I feel as though that if I do, I would burden her with my PR problems. I don't want to be a burden on my friends and family within Gabriel-sama's suit. Izuku said, as the Sphinx realized how far Izuku's self-deprecation went. You give yourself not enough credit. You had protected Sir Michiel from those who wished to do harm to him, doesn't that warrant you to believe in your own strength? The Sphinx asked as it looked into Izuku's wide expressive eyes. That has to be a fluke. I am not that powerful. I may have S6 wings, but that doesn't mean that I am as strong like G. Griselda-san and M. Marana-san or even Gabriel-sama herself. Izuku said, as the Sphinx smiled. Then why do you hate yourself so much? The Sphinx asked, as Izuku looked at his own mirror image of himself. The version of himself he found was one that had gone down the path of something he didn't think he could. He had perpetual sadness in his eyes, he couldn't escape from something that he placed himself on, but there was one thing that was present in the boy's face. Hatred. Hatred for oneself. I hate myself. Because of the fact that I didn't get born with a power of my own. How can I ever love myself when I am just a filthy, quirkless, worthless animal? Izuku said, as tears now were streaming down his face. This is deeper than thought. Gilgamesh will certainly not like how emotional this one is. No matter, it is my mission to make sure that Gilgamesh's successor to his throne is as confident in himself like he once was. The Sphinx thought before an idea came up. What is the difference in both of the yous that you can see? The Sphinx asked. Well, I guess the other me is similar to a V-villain. Izuku asked, as he stared at his other self's form. It was wearing a small tuxedo that had a small tie in the middle, red in the outer vest, as well as black all over. It represented his fall to villainy, as if it was the only thing he could think of to do with his life, but from what it looked like he didn't like being a villain. His eyes were the most haunting thing about the other him, from what Izuku saw that the Sphinx showed him. This Izuku was more on the edge of ending it all. His eyes were sunken in, bags that were heavy there were more present than he first looked, and his hair was cut smaller than it normally is. But the look of pure sadness caused Izuku to look further inside the boy's mind, and as soon as he felt himself become a smaller boy, he looked at his hands and found that he was in his 4-year-old form. Walking over to the other 4-year-old version of himself, he found it holding his legs over his chest as he sobbed into his thighs. I didn't want to become a V-villain. I don't want to be a Vi-villain anymore. I want to go home. I want my mommy. The other Izuku cried out, as the Izuku with angel wings walked over to the boy with a sad look in his eyes. Sitting next to the boy, Izuku stared at his other self as he stopped crying and looked at him. Who are you? The other Izuku asked. I'm you, if you were slightly more religious. And I am an angel because I thought of ending it all, but I met someone who helped me. Do you need help? Izuku asked, as he stared into the red eyes of his villainous self. What makes you think that why you can help me? I am the V-villain Deku. I had ended careers of P-pro heroes. And nobody would ever like me. Izuku's doppelganger said, as he rubbed his eyes crying more. Your eyes are giving a look that are asking for help. Why you don't need anyone to like you. Why you just need to forgive yourself F for the wrongs why you've committed. I don't know H how B but maybe why you have so someone who C can understand W where you come from. Izuku asked as his double looked at him confused. DT the only O1WH who has T tried to H help me was Uraka-san. S she has brown hair and a bob cut. Perpetual cheeks that are blushing all the time I like her V very much. S she TR tries to H help me F from time to time, W when she can find M me of course. B but I'm afraid that if I accept her H help that S she would abandon me, L like K-Kacchan did T to us. Izuku's double said as he cried even more. T then you ask her to H help you. It's alright to be sad. It's alright to ask for H help, I know that I struggle with asking for help myself. I'm afraid that L Lady Gabriel-sama will abandon me W when my usage is all done. B but it's alright because I am ready for when it will happen. Izuku said as he looked at the ground. If you think T that Uraka-san could H help me I think that this G Gabriel-sama would W willingly help you. Why you just G got to be believe that Q quirkless doesn't M mean useless. Izuku's double said. As Izuku thought about the version of him who was a villain's answer to him, Izuku looked at his evil version of himself pulling the boy into a hug. A tight one that would remind him of his own mother, and once they were both starting to tear up, a memory of something in the past surrounded them both. Their mother's vestige of her soul appeared around both of them, smiling down at each one of them, before hugging them both herself. Once feeling the phantom hug of their mother, that was when they let out wails of anguish, having both lost their mother to horrible circumstances. Once Izuku watched his evil personal disappear in modes of light, he couldn't help but smile, as he saw the smile on his evil self's face as he spoke to Izuku one last time. T thank you for saving me. I will ask you Uraka-san if she can't save me. Izuku's double said, as Izuku thought about what to say. His double disappeared soon after as Izuku looked at the Sphinx as it stared at him. As he got ready to speak, he heard a voice from behind him as he froze in place as he slowly turned around to see who was standing there with him. Standing in a form that she used to look like before stress eating and drinking had gotten her into a plumper form, was Inko Midoriya as she smiled at her son. Walking over to her son Izuku ran to her as he once again felt himself slowly change forms into that of a 4-year-old as he threw himself into her arms once again. Crying in her arms, Inko patted his head as she hugged him tight in her chest as she also rubbed his back in a familiar way. Izuku, no matter what you become angel, devil, fallen angel, you will always be my little boy. You are a hero already, you just need to get over the fact that you are quirkless. Like the you who fell into villainy said, quirkless doesn't mean worthless. I know that you are one of the strongest people on earth, if not the entire world of the supernatural. You just need to believe in yourself. Inko said, as Izuku noticed her form slowly fading. Mom. Please don't leave me again. I don't want to be alone. Izuku cried out to her as Inko smiled at him. I'm not leaving you alone Izuku, you are never alone. You have your friends, and I will always be right here. Inko said, as she pointed her finger at his heart. That was when it all clicked in Izuku's mind, everything that had happened to him it was preparing him for this day. And as soon as Izuku watched his mother fade completely from existence as a vestige, he came to one conclusion as he stared at the Sphinx as it smiled at him. I think I get it now. I may not have a Q quirk like everyone else, but that doesn't mean that I won't stop doing my very best to protect G Gabriel and the others, the only way I know how. Izuku said, as the Sphinx smiled at Izuku. Your trials are complete. Congratulations Izuku Midoriya, you are now the sole heir to Gilgamesh Mesopotamia. All of his treasures as well as powers belong to you. The Sphinx said, as Izuku soon found himself standing in front of all the treasures and weapons within Gilgamesh's vault. Wait, what about the physical trail? Izuku called out as the Sphinx looked at him from across the treasury. You passed your trail when you had kept your evil self from passing over the line of villainy that it can do to him. You helped his mind stay on the side of the light, of heroism as a whole, you helped him be saved by Uraka-Kacchan of his dimension. As he had come to me for help in his world as well. The Sphinx smiled as Izuku stared at him in shock. Looking at the weapons of Gilgamesh, Izuku stared at the ones that were the most recognizable of them all. The Gate of Babylon, Excalibur in its true state, Gilgamesh's best friend's own weapons the Chains of Babylon, and finally a young man was standing in front of him. Who are you? Izuku asked in alarm as the young man smiled. My name is Shiru Amiya, and I am passing my power on to you. I was the Sphinx that you spoke to, I am a guardian of humanity created by Gaia to protect humanity as a whole. I deem you worthy of my power of copying my opponent's weapons and gear. It's called Trace On, I can trace any person's weapon, mythical or not, increase its durability, as well as increase its overall power for a short period of time. But with the real weapons, you can place all of them in a reality marble, all you need to do say this chant. Shiru said, as his wispy form moved along with his mouth. I am the bone of my sword. Steel is my body, and fire is my blood. I have created over 1,000 blades. Unaware of beginning. Nor aware of the end. I withstood pain with inconsistent weapons, my hands will never hold anything. Yet, my flame never ends. My whole body was unlimited blade works. Izuku had left the Yura castle within the Gulf of Mexico, he had been thinking previous times he was around Japan. In the previous times he was around Japan. Some time has passed since the ascension into angelhood for him as he looked at the date, and it was late May within the new year. So as he was flying back to Musatafu, Japan, he thought about everything that led him to this moment of his life, searching for artifacts to increase his overall power and strength in order to protect his king, Gabriel-sama. The woman had made sure to give him everything he needed in order to become stronger, but there was one thing he was beginning to feel towards her ever since she stopped him from committing the worst sin within the laws of heaven. For some reason his heart rate increased whenever the woman was moving nearby him and talked to him. It wouldn't stop beating hard and fast as he stammered in front of her normally whenever they met with one another. To everyone else the young man was hopelessly in love with Gabriel, but to Izuku he had never had someone love him like his mother did. For him he thinks it might be a paternal love, where he believes that Gabriel is like the mother he couldn't have. But as he is flying towards Japan, for some reason his mind has a shattering effect as he falls towards the ocean just off the beach of Takoba. Once he splashed into the ocean, he slowly but surely sunk to the bottom of the bank as a memory had come up for him. Izuku was running around the park, looking for a place to hide. Kacchan and his friends just didn't want to hang out with him anymore, and the only times they did was to embarrass him in front of others. He was 10 years old at the time, just 3 away from making that split-second decision to head into the church and meeting Gabriel. As he found a bush to hide himself in, he would never regret his mother having green hair, as well as his father having black hair as well. From what his mother told him about the man himself, he had short, scraggly and curly black hair, compared to her long and dark green. So as he heard the telltale sounds of sparklers coming off in the nearby area, he waited until the bullies had left the area so he could come out. He waited an extra 10 minutes just to be sure as he finally came out of the woodworks of the bush, pulling twigs and leaves from his hair. I can't believe that I thought I could get away with punching Kacchan in the face like that. Izuku muttered to himself, nursing a growing burn mark on his hip. Hello. See, can someone help me? A feminine voice called out. Izuku looked around as he stared at the new arrival who was asking some people around the place something. Walking over to the girl, he heard what her questions were fully about. I'm trying to find this cafe here in Musatafu, my grandmother lives there and I need to make sure that I can get there. It's her birthday today and I don't want to be late. I got lost when getting her a gift, could you help me find directions to the cat cafe called Nekomata? The periwinkle-haired girl asked. Sorry young lady, I don't know where that is. As someone else, or maybe a hero. They should know, we all have things to do today as well. The man said, as a few other civilians nodded along with the man. Izuku slowly moved behind the girl as he soon stood behind the young lady as he took in her features. She was taller than him, by at least a few inches, and she had periwinkle blue eyes that were extremely expressive. He couldn't signify whether her quirk was due to the coloring of her hair and eyes, but he wouldn't judge. It'd be better than not having a quirk like him. Hey, what are you doing here? Do you know where the Nekomata Cat Cafe is? The girl asked, finally noticing his staring. I think it's this way. Izuku said, leading the young woman along. They walked around the park and for a few minutes they conversed with one another about quirks as well as many other things. Izuku had even made some notes about her quirk and how well it could be used in heroic situations. It wouldn't be long before he would run into the cat cafe that the girl was looking for. Turning around to look at Izuku, the young lady stared into his expressive green eyes as she smiled at him. Thank you for showing me around here. It was kind of like a date, but you look younger than me. What is your name? What's your age as well? The girl asked, like a rapid-firing SMG. My name is Midoriya Izuku. The young boy said, as the girl smiled. My name is Hado Nijire. Nice to meet you, Midoriya. Well, I got to go, need to give my present to grandma. Will I ever see you again? Nijire asked, as Izuku thought about it. I don't know. But maybe. Izuku asked, as the girl smiled. I will count on it. It may not be tomorrow or another day, it might even be a few years in the future. See you then, little hero. Nijire said, as she entered the cafe. Izuku would sit there for a few minutes looking in on the cafe as he sighed in sadness. He really wished he could have a family like Nijire's. It had only been a few days since his mother's own death, so he walked back to where he currently lived. An orphanage who couldn't care less about his measly existence. As soon as Izuku had woken up in the ocean, he felt like his entire body was slowly freezing up from the amount of water that was logging up his garments. Leaving the ocean water and teleporting into the second heaven area, he was soon accosted by Marana, who looked over at him and started to laugh. He ha 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 ha. What happened to you? Why, you look like some seaweed caught you on your way out of Gilgamesh's tomb. Marana called out, laughing. Haha, very funny, Marana-senpai. Just had a weird memory trigger somehow when I was flying back to Musatafu. Izuku said, as Marana looked at him confusedly. What are you talking about? She asked, concerned. It's just a memory of helping a girl find her grandmother's cat cafe. She was a really nice person, she didn't even care that I was quirkless as well. She was the first person to treat me as if my existence wasn't required for her to be around. It felt nice to have that memory again. Izuku said, as he sat down, allowing his magic to dry him off. If you are having a memory like that, you should probably go search for that girl. Where do you think they might be? Marana asked, as Izuku thought about it. She could be in UA, from the last time I had heard she was in Musatafu, meaning the only hero school in the area was UA High School. I think she could be there. Izuku said, as Marana nodded. Well, go there and see if you can find her again and rekindle that little relationship you have with her. Marana said, as Izuku looked at her scandalized. Marana. I do not have a relationship with her. I only gave her directions to her grandmother's cafe. That was just two strangers meeting one another. Nothing more. Izuku said, standing up from his seat with a massive blush on his face before teleporting away. He says that now, but he already teleported away to UA at the moment. I swear it's extremely easy to read him like a book, especially with his love life. Isn't that right, Griselda? Marana asked, as the blue-haired serious woman looked at the younger. I swear, at this rate we will make him fall into the fallen angels ranks because of your constant teasing. Griselda said, as Marana chuckled. Izuku landed in a spot near Sir Night Eye's agency. The young angel didn't want to be seen appearing randomly on the street to make people think he's a villain. So as he walked around the place, he never noticed how a certain individual was staring at him in shock as well as confusion. He continued his walk as he looked for the familiar face of Najire Hado, and to his complete and utter sadness, he couldn't find the young woman. It wasn't until he overheard some talking in Night Eye's agency that they were going on a mission to retrieve a small child from a Yakuza base who had been torturing a small child for some odd reason. It was here that Izuku became slightly furious about how a small child was being abused by their parents, and so he used his magic to find the main base of operations for the Yakuza within Japan. He soon found it through his magic. They had tried to kidnap him in order to complete their goals of whatever they wanted. He was just glad that when he was on the streets, they stopped looking for him. So as he used his magic to disappear from the street whilst also deleting the memories from those in the process of his teleportation in front of the masses, he appeared in front of the Shai Hasekai's operations center. Izuku didn't need to wait to attack the place, but he wanted his presence to be a complete surprise as he stood on a building nearby as the heroes and police arrived. He sat there looking at the place before he saw some familiar periwinkle-colored hair as he smiled. She was here, and it seemed like she was working with Ryukyu, the number 10 heroine of Japan. That heroine was a really good one, considering she hated bullying. He had read up on Ryukyu as the woman had actively gone against what most people wished against the quirkless, as she spent some of her money for the charity for quirkless individuals within Japan. He watched as the heroes and police had initiated the raid on the building, as Izuku manipulated the cameras just a bit to show a looping image of the heroes. Not there, in fact, it was just a few minutes before they arrived is what he showed the villains inside. So now that the heroes had the element of surprise, the Shai Hasekai were getting taken down swiftly as well as quickly. It wasn't more than an hour later that Izuku watched the ground break apart as Overhaul had appeared as a massive amalgamation of his entire Yakuza. He growled at a brown bob hair-cutted girl as she activated her quirk, which seemed to be pink electricity moving about her entire body. He watched as the girl had been fighting the amalgamation of Overhaul. As Izuku stared on in awe, the girl was showing true strength as well as determination against the villain himself. And, for some reason, his heart skipped a beat when she had looked over at him for just a brief moment as her eyes had become something much more concerned for his presence. Izuku had sensed Overhaul's power level within the supernatural. With all these quirks combined into him, they weren't even close to that of a fallen angel cadre class being. Much less his own power. So as he watched as the girl moved over towards him, Izuku watched as her eyes became much wider as he revealed 6 green wings coming from his back, as well as a halo over his head and placing a finger on his lips. She moved away from him instantly right that moment as Izuku slowly floated into the air, catching the attention of all the heroes and police present. What's that guy doing? Is he going to stop the fight himself? We should probably tell him to get away. Everyone started to scramble in order to bring the boy down from the heights he was gaining. But by the time they all noticed where he was going, they watched as their ally, the brown-haired girl, kick Overhaul over to the guy who was right behind the amalgamation of the villain and merely place his hand on the villain's back. which did cause the villain to look behind himself, and once the villain had started to scream in pain, they watched as the new arrival had pulled apart each and every Yakuza member that Overhaul had completely absorbed into himself. As soon as all the villains hit the ground, Izuku held Overhaul by the throat as the man tried to use his quirk on Izuku's body itself. But for some reason, his quirk wasn't working on the young man as Izuku smiled at the villain. Your quirk won't work on something that is technically already dead. Izuku smiled at the villain as he lowered himself to the ground where the brown-haired girl was currently standing leaned over in pain. Izuku knocked out the villain before pressing on towards the girl as he pulled the little girl off of her back as he placed some magic through the girl's veins in order to cut off the power source of her quirk. Once that was completed, Izuku looked at the brown-haired girl as she looked up to him now as her face was covered in soot as well as blushing at him. Softly placing the girl on the ground, Izuku checked on the brown-haired girl's vitals as he noticed something incredibly wrong with her body. "Why, you're dying," Izuku muttered before grabbing the girl and was about to disappear when he heard movement behind himself. "Hold it right there, young man. What are you doing here unlawfully using your quirk?" a draconic voice shouted at Izuku. Looking back at the woman, Izuku noticed it was Ryukyu, so he decided to state something that caused the draconic human to stare at him in shock. "She is currently losing her life force. Her quirk is killing her slowly," Izuku said as he picked the injured and exhausted girl. "Wherever you are going, you are taking me. I am her mentor for her work studies," Ryukyu said as Izuku nodded. Once he made a magic circle large enough for the three of them, they disappeared from the area as the other heroes and hero interns were looking around for them. Deciding to just call this a win, they collected all the villains as well as the small girl with the horn on her head and taking them all to prison and the hospital for the small girl. With Izuku, Ryukyu and the brown-haired girl, Izuku had appeared in heaven as Ryukyu looked around the place. What is this place?" the draconic woman asked, now in her human form. "This is second heaven. It is where all angels who serve their kings of their suits reside. I am leaving this young lady here and bringing the leaders of heaven over here so that we can talk about her problem," Izuku said as Ryukyu nodded as Izuku got up to leave. The two girls had stayed in the white room completely shocked by their surroundings when the door opened a few minutes later. In walked in a blonde-haired woman, the same with a blonde-haired man, with a couple of other angels who were looking at them. "Izuku, can you tell us what is wrong with the girl on your bed?" Michiel asked as he walked over to the girl himself. "I sensed that her life force energy was slowly depleting. She won't be alive for another 2 years if this keeps up. We need to give her an extended lifespan in order to allow her to become the hero she needs," Izuku informed as everyone in the room looked to him. Michiel was unperturbed when he looked over the girl before asking his own questions to her. "So what is your name, young lady?" he asked as the girl stared at him for a moment before looking to Ryukyu, who nodded. "My name is Uraraka Chako." What is this place?" she asked as Michiel nodded. "This place is what you all would refer to as heaven. But really, this is Izuku's bedroom within second heaven," Michiel said as Chako stared at Ryukyu, who was now having a hard time believing this. "Wait, so you're telling me that this place is heaven as in from the Bible?" Ryukyu asked as Michiel nodded. "I am Lord Michiel of Heaven. This is my little sister Gabriel. The one who brought your intern to us is Midoriya Izuku, a human turned angel," Michiel explained as Ryukyu looked at Izuku. "Well then, why are his wings green compared to the gold or white wings of normal angels from mythology?" Chako asked as Michiel and Gabriel looked at one another. "It's probably because of the fact that his power is ever growing. So in order to hold in the power he wields, it is moved into his wings. And because of the color of his hair, it changed the color of his wings from what they were supposed to be in terms of white or gold," Michiel said as Chako nodded. "So what is Midoriya talking about? My quirk is killing me?" Chako asked as Izuku spoke up. "The power you are wielding, it's not meant to be held by someone who already has a quirk. I imagine someone's quirk representing a full cup of water, but then you add more water to it and it starts to spill on the ground. The quirk you have is superpowering your original quirk, but at the same time, overflowing the cup of water that holds your original quirk, slowly killing you over time," Izuku said as Chako nodded. "How long do I exactly have to live if I keep this quirk?" Chako asked as Izuku thought about it. "I believe that an estimate would be around 2 years, 3 at the best if you don't use that power as much," Izuku said as Chako's face became completely scared. I won't be able to become a hero like this. How? Why is this happening?" Chako asked fearfully. "This is why I brought you here. Gabriel-sama has a way to increase your lifespan. I just hope that you accept it, but you cannot allow yourself to fall from grace when it happens," Izuku said as Gabriel pouted at him. "You know, I can tell her these things too, you know," she said before looking at Chako. "Do you want to become a member of my brave saints?" I know that this is all sudden, but your lifespan will be increased to around 10 to 20,000 years if you take this chance. Gabriel said, as Izuku nodded. Before I make my decision, could we bring All Might, Gran Torino and Recovery Girl into this? It will be a long explanation to inform them about this. Ochako asked, as Izuku looked at his leaders. I don't see why not, so long as they don't inform the world that we supernatural creatures exist. Michiel said, as Ochako nodded. Ochako then pulled up her phone, which Izuku noticed was a flip phone, as she called her mentors, as well as seemingly Doctor. Izuku then noticed that this would be the second time he would be meeting the man who crushed his dreams and slowly slinked away from the room. As he sat on a chair outside, he was too deep in thought when someone sat in the chair next to him. Hey, is there something wrong? A familiar voice asked, as Izuku looked to his right to find Setsuna standing there with a smile. Hey Setsuna. They just about to meet the person who broke my dreams. Izuku said, as Setsuna looked at him confusedly. What do you mean by that? Who broke your dreams? She asked concerned. I don't think it's that important. Izuku muttered looking away. As Setsuna was about to ask another question, they heard a commotion inside the room where Izuku had placed Ochako, and both ran inside to find a skinny frail man with blonde hair looking at the angels with a smaller old man who held a cane and an old woman with a nurse's outfit who were glaring at the angels and Ryukyu. What is going on here? Izuku asked, confused as the skinny man looked at Izuku. Both looked at each other's eyes for a moment as they recognized the other almost immediately as the man sighed. Never thought that you'd be brought into the supernatural world, young Midoriya. The man said, as everyone looked at Izuku. You know that green-haired brat Toshinori? The old man questioned. Yes, after all I was the one who crushed his dreams about a full year ago. The man said, as everyone looked at him concerned. Well, can you please hear us out then, Toshinori? We cannot allow your protege to die like this, and if you want her to live longer than just 2 years you need to hear us out. Gabriel said, as Toshinori glared at them all. I will not have my protege join your ranks. Toshinori called out, as Izuku looked at him. You'd be willing to let your Rakusen die in 2 years because you don't want heaven to have the quirk you passed on to her. Don't you? Izuku asked, as Toshinori looked at Izuku. How do you know about that, young man? Toshinori glared at Izuku now. I just figured it out when I was alone inside heaven one day. And I just want you to know that if you do this, your Rakusen will die in her 3rd year at UA. She won't ever become a hero if you don't allow her to do this. It is her choice, not yours. Izuku said, as he sat down on the bed. How could you let them take you into their ranks, Midoriya? They cannot be trusted. Toshinori said, as Izuku looked at him. I lost all hope when you told me I couldn't become a quirkless hero All Might. I had been told to kill myself by my old friend the very same day that I met you, so when you had left me on that street after crushing my dreams. I seriously contemplated just ending it all there. But when I met you about 5 years ago and you told me to give up on my dreams, I just couldn't handle it anymore. So I just allowed myself to wilt away before meeting Gabriel-sama at a church I used to go to as a young child. She met me there and prevented me from making the biggest mistake that I would ever make, and I was seriously contemplating just ending it all. Izuku said, as All Might stared at him in shock. What are you talking about? I don't remember meeting you until I tried to take up your missing persons case. All Might said, as Izuku told him about the death of his mother. And All Might remembered a small boy who had come up to him and asked him if he could become a quirkless hero. I am truly sorry for what I had said to you, young man, but I cannot allow my successor to become a part of the supernatural. It is too dangerous for her. All Might said, as everyone looked at him. We wouldn't be allowing her to see the worst the world of the supernatural could produce, we would be only showing her how to use our power, as well as saving her life from 2 years of pain and suffering. Gabriel said, as All Might stared at them for a moment. I want to live, All Might. I don't know how Midoriya knows about your weakened form, but if he knows that you're All Might, then shouldn't we just try this out? Ochako asked, as Recovery Girl chose this moment to speak up. Will there be any adverse effects of her becoming a member of your Brave Saints program? The old nurse asked, as Gabriel smiled. No, the only one who had adverse effects was Izuku. He was simply too powerful to be held because he held a sacred gear, and his wings were mutated because of it. But she should be able to become a 5 of hearts without any issues. Gabriel said, as Recovery Girl stated she would be nearby in order to keep an eye on Ochako. So as the group had started the Brave Saint activation on Ochako's body to become an Angel of Hearts. The room glowed as the card was shown on Ochako's chest and lowered into her body before being absorbed by it. Once the glow had ended, the group had looked back at the girl who was now sleeping on the bed in confusion when they heard a loud thumping sound. Turning around, they found that Izuku was holding his head in slight pain, but there was a massive blush on his face as he took a knee. Izuku. What is wrong? Gabriel fretted over him. I don't know why, but WYMIH hearing other V voices inside Ichako, Izuku groaned in pain as everyone looked over at the young girl. As they took a closer look at Ichako, they noticed two things wrong with her. One, her hair had changed from brown to a galaxy color, and another was that her already curvaceous body was transformed into a more voluptuous form. So about those adverse effects? Recovery girl questioned as Gabriel sweated a little bit. TTH, this has never happened before, Izuku. So this is just something special? Gabriel asked, as everyone in the room, minus Izuku and Ichako, just gave the woman a deadpan expression. You know the whole saying that not everyone is treated equally? Well, you should know that I was one of the people who were treated far worse than the saying really means. Izuku said, as he felt his mind go back into a time when things were harsher and at the same time much more bearable. Izuku is around 4 years old at this moment in time as he is running out of his bedroom with excitable energy fit for a 4-year-old. He is seen running into the kitchen where a young woman of around 25 to 30 years of age is finishing some dishes. Mommy. See, come on. We need to see the video. Izuku said, jumping at the woman's feet. I know, Izuku, I don't know why you love that video so much. You probably managed to bring that video all those views on your own with how many times you've watched it. The woman said. This was Midoriya Inko, Izuku's mother. She was a very good-looking woman who was smiling at her son as he ran into the bedroom where he kept the computer. Walking through the hallway, you could see a picture of just the two of them and another of Inko and a man with black curly hair smiling at the camera. But as Inko walked by the image, you could see her eye the picture for just a moment, stopping in her tracks before grabbing the picture. Looking at the man in the picture, Inko let out a sad sigh as she placed it down, as a single tear came down her face before walking to her son's room. Entering it, you could see literally everything was built around All Might. Izuku had looked up to the man when he first debuted on the internet as a new hero. Turning on the computer, the young boy had been vibrating in his seat with the innocence of a youthful young boy. Inko had then pulled up the video that Izuku loved so much, and as soon as she got ready to hit play, she looked at her son for a moment to see the smile on his face. You've probably put at least 10 million views on this one video yourself. I don't know how you could like this video so much, Izuku. Inko said, hitting play. The video showed a torn battlefield that was on fire, buildings had roaring flames coming from different floors as a bus was turned over. He's been moving in and out ever since he got here. A civilian called out before another one came up. He has already saved over 100 people within the first hour alone. He must be super powerful. Another civilian called out as a manly voice called out from behind the bus as a figure showed up. He was wearing red, blue and yellow spandex, as his hair was golden blonde and a tuft of two somewhat kind of bunny ears on top of his head. He had blue eyes as well as a very masculine jawline as he stared at everyone with a smile that provided them the warmth of a grandfather coming in to protect his children. Worry not, citizens. Hope has arrived. For I am here. The hero said as Izuku happily vibrated even more. He's so cool. When I get my quirk, I want to be as strong and kind like All Might. He's just the coolest hero I've ever seen. Izuku said as he happily shuddered in his seat in front of his mother. Inko watched her son as she smiled sadly at him before she left him to his devices. It wouldn't be until a few hours later that the duo would be walking to the doctor's office in order to find out whether or not Izuku would have a quirk. They had noticed that Izuku's entire class had manifested quirks of their own, but Izuku was seemingly the only one who hadn't manifested his own. So they were heading to a very good quirk specialist named Dr. Daruma Tsubasa. The man was very good in his craft. In fact, his great-grandfather was the original man who made the quirk singularity theory about 100 years prior. The man's name was Dr. Daruma Yujiko, and the man was a legendary scientist and doctor in the field of medicine. But as the two entered the office of Daruma Tsubasa, they had looked around the small room before the door opened as a portly old man entered the room. He had glasses that were reminiscent of Dr. Eggman from the Sonic games of pre-quirk eras hundreds of years ago. Alright, so we are here to see what quirk the boy has, correct? Daruma questioned Inko as the woman nodded. Alright, we will need to take an x-ray of his feet in order to do the first tests. After that we will do a blood test in order to see if he has the quirk factor within his DNA. After that it should take about 15 minutes before we can figure out what is wrong. Daruma said as he pulled both Midoriyas out of his office and took the tests. He set the papers aside from the left as he took a close look at both images of Izuku's feet as well as the blood test results. He hadn't informed them what they were yet, he was just taking a close look at them to see if there was anything wrong. The boy didn't have a quirk factor in his DNA, so he was looking at the x-ray to see if there was anything wrong, and lo and behold, the young boy had a second toe joint in his pinky toe on both feet. This would be tragic for the boy, but he is a doctor and he must lay everything blunt and straight to the point just so that they could understand the situation. So as he left the room, he entered the office where the two Midoriyas were sitting in wait. They noticed his presence at the door and prepared for the news. Sitting down in his seat, he leaned over on his right side as he angled his head to look at Mrs. Midoriya. "I'm sorry, but he won't be manifesting a quirk," he said very bluntly. What are you talking about, doctor? What is wrong with my baby?" Inko asked, as the man sighed. "You and your husband are 4th generation quirk users, correct?" Daruma asked, as Inko flinched slightly. Well, I am a 4th generation, my husband was 3rd generation," Inko said, as Daruma nodded along. "What were the quirks you both had again?" Daruma asked, as Inko gave him an explanation. "I have a small attraction quirk of telekinesis, my husband had fire breathing as his quirk name." I don't understand, how can my son not have a quirk?" Inko asked, as Daruma answered. "Well, the chances were 1 in a million chance for 4th generation quirk users. In order to manifest a quirk, your son just managed to catch a 1 in 100,000 chance of not manifesting a quirk. In other words, because of a second toe joint in his feet, your son cannot manifest a quirk. There might be a chance that his quirk factor just hasn't been seen yet, but that has yet to be seen. Based on these results, your son is quirkless, ma'am," Daruma said, as Inko noticed Izuku's face being that of pale white. "Okay, thank you for your time, Dr. Tsubasa," Inko said, as the man nodded his head. Once the two were heading home, Inko noticed how quiet her son had been the entire time. Hoping to take his mind off of the quirk diagnosis, she told him that she was going to be making dinner, his favorite, as he visibly brightened up a little, but not enough. It would be late at night when we find Izuku sitting in front of his computer once more as he stares at the video that is playing. Inko had come into his room to call him for dinner, but she saw the video that was playing. "Worry not, citizens. Hope has arrived. For I am here." All Might's voice could be heard as Izuku spoke to his mother. "He's the coolest hero there is. I wanted to become a hero like him someday. Do you think I can be a hero too?" Izuku asked, looking to his mother for comfort, tears brimming in his eyes. Inko started to cry as she ran over to her son as she pulled him into a hug. As she cried on his shoulder, she could only say 6 words. "I'm sorry, Izuku. I'm so sorry." It had been a few weeks since then, and Izuku had been avoiding Kacchan, his childhood friend, for a bit. He didn't know how the boy would take his quirkless diagnosis, and when he came to school the next available day he wished he hadn't. When he was found out to be quirkless, everyone just decided to ditch him as a friend. Why be friends with someone who could potentially pass their quirklessness onto you? So for that day forwards, Izuku was basically without any friends for years, although only at this point 2 years passed. He was walking around the Musatafu Park when he heard an explosion from nearby. Looking at the scene before himself, he found a young girl his age wearing a pink cardigan shirt as well as a long black skirt as she held onto her bruised arm that was slowly becoming a burn. Izuku winced at the burn as he felt the phantom pain of his own burn from a few days prior on his back. But as he was looking at the girl, he never realized that he had appeared in front of the girl to her defense against Kacchan. The girl, now that he got a better look at her, had long black hair that extended to her lower back, not to mention that it was placed into a singular spiky ponytail. She had gray eyes that were large and expressive as she looked at him in awe, but that was taken away when he heard familiar crackling. "What are you doing here, Deku? What do you expect to be able to do, even if you're quirkless?" Kacchan asked as Izuku shivered in fear. Why you're hurting them? Why you shouldn't hurt others, that's not what a hero does, K-K-Kacchan. If you don't stop, then I will stop you myself," Izuku called out bravely. As both sides looked at one another, Izuku glared as hard as he could, even though his entire body was shaking tremendously. "Well, if you think your quirkless ass can defeat me, then you have another thing coming, Deku. It's 3-on-1. Get him, boys." Kacchan called out as he and the two cronies of his prepared their own quirks. Izuku got into his own fighting stance as he prepared for the inevitable fight. Kacchan was a slightly taller boy who had hair that looked like it came out of an explosion. It was ash blonde in color as he glared at Izuku, his quirk being as explosive as his personality. Kacchan's eyes were ruby red as he glared hatefully at Izuku. For some unknown reason to Izuku, the boy was really hateful of him. The other two weren't nothing to slouch at either, one having the ability to fly, since he had two pterodactyl-like wings coming out of his back, not to mention the boy to the right, who had the uncanny ability to increase the length as well as sharpness of his fingers. Throwing themselves at one another, we watch as the scene moves towards the sky to represent the passage of time. A few decades of minutes later, we find Izuku laying on the ground with burn marks on his body and clothes. He coughs a bit as he struggles to sit upright as he grabs his side in pain, as a very bad burn scar was about to be replacing that spot on his body. "Are you alright?" the feminine voice asked as Izuku looked back at the girl. She had surprisingly stayed nearby as he had been beaten to high hell and even had managed to pull out some bandages from somewhere. I'm fine, I deal with K-Kacchan all the TT time. Izuku stuttered out as the girl helped place on some bandages. I made these with my quirk, I heard about how you don't have one. And I don't think that you should believe him. The girl said as Izuku thought about it. Why are you here in Musatafu? Izuku asked, his mind wanted to know more about the girl's quirk, but he would be rude asking her that. My parents and I were coming in to visit one of our company buildings in Musatafu, and my mother told me to go to a local park. I never knew that there was ruffians like that blonde boy here, otherwise I would have moved to a different park. The girl said as Izuku thought about it. What is your name? Izuku asked as the girl looked at him in the eye. My name is Yaoi Rozu Momo, I hope that you become a friend of mine. I don't have any at the moment. The girl, Momo asked. That's sure, I could use some friends of my own anyway. Izuku said, standing up seemingly effortlessly after talking to the girl. Helping her up, he decided to walk her back to the company she had walked away from, completely and blissfully unaware that there was someone watching their interaction from afar. As they were preparing to leave, a man came over to them who was wearing a suit and tie. Looking at the man instantly, Izuku became protective of her as the man wasn't someone he knew. The older man looked at the boy and with a chuckle, stood a bit away from him. Don't worry young man, I've just come for the mistress. The older man said as Izuku looked at him confused now. Hello Alfred, this is Deku right? Momo asked as Izuku rapidly shook his head in a negative way. What is your name young man? Alfred asked. The man was similarly built like a butler, but Izuku knew that some butlers were very powerful. Cough overlord cough. My name is Midoriya Izuku. I live in the area. Izuku said as the butler gave a small smile. Well, can you show me to your home? I would like to give the Yaoi Rozu parents the phone number of your mother. Alfred said as Izuku allowed the two to follow him. They soon walked about 5 minutes away from the park to a small apartment complex within a bad part of town and entered the building. This place looks filthy, is this where you live? Alfred asked, looking at the place. That is just how it looks on the inside of the complex lobby, me and my mother live on the 3rd floor of the building. Izuku said as he showed them to a stairway. Walking up the stairs for a small while they soon arrived at the 3rd floor as they made their way into the small apartments. They soon arrived at apartment number 25 and Alfred knocked on the door and as soon as the door was knocked on a young woman's voice was heard from inside. When the door was opened, Inko had opened it to see an old man, a little girl as well as her son looking at her all scuffed up. Izuku, what happened? Inko fretted over her son. Momo looked at the scene with a happy smile and Izuku groaned a little bit at the love he got from his mother weekly, but he never stopped her. How can I help you sir? Inko asked a few minutes later after Izuku and Momo got some baths. I would like to inform you about how your son had protected a very wealthy family's daughter without any regard to his own safety. This could be relayed to the parents so that you could get a money reward for your son interfering with a bullying incident. Alfred said as he pulled out the card of the Yaoi Rozu's family. Inko looked at the card and her eyes had nearly bugged out of her head as she saw the name. Her son had protected one of the most powerful family's daughters in Japan. Not only that, but he protected her from a bullying incident. Who was the person who was bullying her? Inko asked, wanting to make sure that she knew who it was. It was a boy who had ash blonde hair, ruby red eyes. And a very explosive quirk and personality. He appeared to call your son Deku, which after hearing it from your son means useless and useless puppet. I believe your son is being bullied by the boy as well. Alfred said as Inko sat there in shock. There was no possible way that Kacchan was the bully for the Yaoi Rozu heir, not to mention her own child. There was more than enough evidence for it, but Inko just couldn't believe that such a child could do this to both her son and someone else's daughter, much less the heir to the Yaoi Rozu conglomerate. So as she sat there looking off into space as her brain caught up to all the information that had arrived, that was when her son and the Yaoi Rozu heir had returned back to the living room. Looking at her son for but a moment, she noticed that there was some bandages over his left hip, his lower abdomen, as well as his upper arms and many more. She stood up as she moved towards her son. Alfred kept a close eye on her to see what she would do with the information she had. Inko kneeled in front of her son, who had noticed she was walking towards him with a blank expression on her face. Mom? What's wrong? Izuku asked. Izuku, why didn't you tell me? Inko asked, pulling her son into an embrace as she started to cry. Tell you what? Izuku asked, stuttering. Why didn't you tell me about what Kacchan has been doing to you? Inko begged as she pulled her son into a tighter hug. Her eyes were brimming with tears as Izuku's own eyes from Alfred's point of view had become pinpricks as well as very, very fearful. I didn't want to worry you mom. I don't want to become an even bigger burden on your life. I hear what the neighbors talk about you and me. Izuku said as he started to cry on her shoulder. They continued to cry with one another as Momo and Alfred watched from afar, and once they were allowed to stop, Alfred talked about giving Inko the phone number of the Aoi Rosus in order to set up a play date with the two children. As Inko immediately took this opportunity for herself, she made sure to have the two children talk and play with one another over the next year and a half. But like all good things, they had to come to an end, as the Aoi Rosu family had to return back to the Aichi prefecture near the Kamino ward. It was here that everything for Izuku, the world decided to make it so much worse for him. About 4 years had passed now. Over the last 4 years since the leave of Yaoi Rosu, Izuku had been getting bullied even worse than before. His bully Bakugo Katsuki had been increasing the amount of pain and suffering of Izuku so that he could sate his hatred of the boy for telling on him. Ever since he was told to never touch Izuku ever again, the young boy had decided that it would be his mission to make Izuku's life after that day a living nightmare. He would get daily beatings, suicide baitings from classmates, as well as his belongings destroyed to the point that his grades would fall. It got so bad to the point that as of right now, Izuku was walking with his mother as a 10-year-old whilst they were walking to the store. Something horrible was about to happen to the Midoriya family. Izuku and his mother entered a shop where they could get some groceries. They had been getting more and more bills to pay that were just becoming higher and higher because of Izuku's quirklessness. Inko had told Izuku many times over that she would never abandon him, and through thick or thin, they had managed to make do with the bills. But it was soon becoming too much for Inko as her body was starting to degrade itself as well as its mind. As they were leaving the small shop, they saw a villain fight happening nearby, but for some reason it was coming closer to them. So they took off running towards the nearby hero agencies, but they couldn't escape fast enough. The villain attack was right upon them both as they turned around to face the villain alone without a hero in sight. The villain looked at both of them before an evil smirk came across their face as they went to strike at them both. Izuku pushed his mother out of the way, his mind being a cacophony of complete worry for his mother, not even thinking about saving his own life. He wanted his mother to live her life without the stain that his own gave hers, but as soon as she was pushed out of the way, the villain had smiled even more as he changed the trajectory of his attack and turned the boy's mother into nothing more than a puddle of blood. As soon as that was done, the villain turned towards the boy who was now looking at the puddle of blood and bone with faraway eyes as he stumbled over to the puddle. All that was going through his mind were the simple things his bullies at school would tell him on a daily basis. You can't be a hero. You're quirkless. Quirkless rejects like you deserve to be forgotten. You should just die already, at least then your mother will be happier. Just kill yourself already. I don't care about what you do in your life, Deku, just make sure that if you want to die, do it far away from me. Izuku stared at the puddle as tears started to flow from his eyes. He was the person involved in killing his mother, he killed her, it was all his fault. He really should have never brought his mother to this convenience store, at least then she wouldn't have died like that. His actions towards protecting her brought her to her own demise, and he was starting to shut down from the entire world in that moment. He was so into his own little world that when he looked back at the villain, the man was preparing to finish him off as well. But just as the villain was about to have his fist turn Izuku into a pancake, a very familiar voice from Izuku's childhood had been heard behind him. Turning around to look at who was laughing, he saw red, blue and yellow spandex standing behind him. It was All Might. He had finally arrived, but what took him so long to get here? Izuku would watch as the villain would be taken down by the #1 hero of the world, and he couldn't help but feel as if his mother's death was his own fault. He was always at fault at school, so maybe his singular act of trying to keep his mother away from harm was what caused her death to become realized. As soon as All Might came back over to see how the boy was reacting to the villain attack, he couldn't help but realize that there was a puddle of blood and bones. Kneeling next to the boy, the man saw the faraway look in his eyes as he shook the boy's shoulders. "Young man, are you alright? Are you hurt?" All Might questioned. "I'm not fine, and my mother is dead, and it's all my fault." Izuku muttered as he placed his hands over his head on the ground, with his eyes starting to become crazed. "I guess with all the chaos around here you would think that, but what did you do in order to cause your mother's death, young man?" All Might questioned once more, being softer than usual. "That villain he was about to see crush us. But I pushed my mother out of the way." As she had fallen to the right of the villain, he was mid-swing for his attack. But somehow, he changed the trajectory of his punch, Izuku said, as tears flowed out once more. All Might got the gist of what happened and knew what to do for the boy in order to make him feel better. "Young man, your actions may have gotten your mother killed. But there will be times when you try to save someone only for it to backfire. It's happened to me far more times than I would like. What are your dreams?" All Might questioned. I wanted to become a hero. I'll like you, but that's impossible," Izuku said, as All Might looked at him. "What do you mean it's impossible? Does this have to do with your quirk, young man?" All Might questioned as Izuku nodded. What is this quirk that you are believing is impossible to attain your dreams? All Might questioned. I'm QUIRKLESS Izuku said, as All Might had become eerily silent. You're quirkless. Why do you wish to become a hero, young man? All Might asked, trying to see why the boy wanted to be like him whilst being quirkless. All I've ever wanted was to be a hero like you. To arrive to a scene of a crime or villain fight, make the people know that with my presence that they would be safe. But I couldn't even do that for my own mother. How could I be a hero if I couldn't save my own mother? Izuku asked, as All Might stayed quiet for a moment. I don't think the hero track is right for you, young man. I know that is as blunt as I can get with my words, but please listen to what else I can say to you. All Might states, as Izuku looked at the man. What do you mean by that? Izuku asked, as All Might sighed. Young man, there are many ways to become a hero. You could become a police detective and solve cases for those who are lost, solve murder cases for families who were hurt. You could become a doctor as well as a quirk specialist if you put your mind to it. Just believe me when I say this, young man, if you cannot believe in yourself to become a hero you want to be, then maybe being a hero isn't what you should be. All Might said, before moving away from the area. As All Might left Izuku near the blood pile, the boy had let out his tears in full as he hugged the cardigan of his late mother in his arms. Blood pouring all around him as he cried silently. It was later that day that all his belongings would be sold for All Might merchandise given away to those who should really take them. They helped him live on his own for a while inside the orphanage, that was if they never stopped taking his money for their own reasons. Stating that he wasn't old enough to have the kind of money he had, and every day since then they would increase his bullying as well as abuse inside the orphanage by at least 100 times than what he felt at school. Over the next 3 years, Izuku would be put through the ringer many times over, and he would at least try and work up to his dream of becoming a hero. But as like stated before, he just couldn't keep up with the workload of training, since his body wasn't getting the right nutrients, as well as the right amount of food he should have gotten. His body was slowly shrinking in height, his eyes were becoming sunken in, and his bones in his body were becoming brittle. His entire life as well as everything he wanted to do was stomped on by everything, and all he wanted was for all the pain to end. Izuku had arrived to what he thought would be his final class of middle school, and the teacher had come in talking about their future career forms. As the teacher talked about who wanted to become heroes, Izuku had long since changed the dream of becoming a hero for others to something as mundane as either a quirk analyst or a quirk specialist. But even that dream was being abused by everyone, stating that someone quirkless couldn't be as good as a real quirk specialist who has the quirk for it. But there was one person who was not having Izuku's late giving up of his dream of being a hero. As soon as it was stated that Izuku was going to UA for general studies or business courses, Katsuki growled and moved over to Izuku. The boy was looking more dead than usual, but the boy didn't care, creating an explosion at the boy's desk. He looked into Izuku's eyes. They were not looking at him at the moment before he spoke. What are you thinking, trying to go to UA, Deku? Katsuki growled at Izuku. I'm sorry, you wanted to go to UA. I guess I will just make a change to mine and have it said I will go to Shiketsu. Izuku said, as Katsuki growled even more. Alright, what the fuck is wrong with you? Are you so dead inside that you don't register what your previous dreams were? Deku, what the fuck happened to you? Is the death of your mother so horrible that you give up that easily? Katsuki screamed at Izuku. Izuku looked at the boy as he merely smiled at Katsuki, the smile bringing Katsuki's spine a massive chill that ran down it. I'm just listening to you, Kacchan. If I can't become a hero, I will do something else with my life. That is what you wanted me to do, right? Stay away from you? Izuku asked, as Katsuki let go of Izuku and scat as he went back to his seat. The day continued on as Katsuki walked over to Izuku and his quirk analysis notes, not for future hero work, just notes of everyday heroes. Alright nerd, what the fuck happened to you? Katsuki growled at Izuku. What are you talking about? I gave up on my dream of becoming a quirkless hero like you wanted, why are you asking me that now? Izuku asked, as he stared at Katsuki. It's not like you to give up now of all times in your life, what the fuck is the issue? Katsuki grabbed Izuku's shirt and pulled him closer to his face. I got my mother killed. If I did that, what makes you think that I can be a hero now? Izuku asked, with a dead tone. What happened to the dreams we had together, nerd? What happened to the both of us becoming heroes together? Katsuki yelled at Izuku. It was the breaking point, 10 long years of bullying as well as abuse from recent years building up to now. Why do I give up the dream I had for years? I got my mother killed in a villain attack, had All Might tell me the hero track is not for me, not to mention the 10 long years of bullying from you, our classmates, teachers as well as those in the orphanage. I have had enough of being abused, bullied as well as being told my dreams are just that, dreams. You keep telling me every time I try and attain my dream of heroism that it's not right for me and to not go to UA for that. Well, look what's happening. You are asking me to become something that I can't be anymore. You are the one causing me the most pain and suffering because of something that happened when we were kids, Kitsuki, kids. I am done being the one person who you have to beat up in order to feel better about yourself. I don't care if I have to kill myself to be out of your life forever. As long as I don't have to see you ever again, I will gladly take my life knowing that you aren't there to make me feel inadequate, wrong, not to mention as if my dreams mean nothing in the grand scheme of yours. You call me useless, well I can then call you the villain of my entire life. Izuku screamed at Kitsuki's face. With that stated, Izuku started to walk away when he heard a telltale sign of Bakugo's quirk coming to life and he dodged to the left of a right hook with an explosion. He didn't get out of the explosion entirely, but he made sure he took minimal damage from the concussive force. He turned around to see Kitsuki with the most rage he had ever seen on his face in his entire life of knowing the boy. I am not a villain, there is no way that I am a villain. You take that back, Deku. Kitsuki screamed out, landing another punch on Izuku. As soon as the boy had been pushed back into a wall, Kitsuki continued his barrage of explosive punches on the quirkless boy. Explosive punch after another, Izuku was left ingrained into the wall, a small crater in it showing the damage of his blows. Izuku's face was covered in blood as well as bruises, his lower body covered and burned, as well as his face sporting 2 black eyes, as well as a broken nose. As soon as Kitsuki started to walk away, the boy didn't know what came over him for a moment before he stated something that would truly set Izuku's mind on the track for a sinful thought. If you want a quirk so bad, there might be a way for you to do it. Kitsuki said, as Izuku opened one of his eyes. It was squinting, but Kitsuki had Izuku's attention. Pray you get a quirk in your next life and jump off the roof. At least then you might be able to get a quirk in your next life and become a hero like you used to wish for. Kitsuki said, before walking away. As Izuku left the school about an hour later, he heard the people around him talking as if he was someone to avoid. Some talked about how he should head to the hospital and get himself checked over, but Izuku had only one goal in mind. Head to the church he and his mother went to when he was very young, around 3 to 4 years of age. As soon as he arrived at the church on the hill, he entered the place as he felt his injuries be brought back with a vengeance. Grunting somewhat loudly, he collapsed onto the ground outside of the building as he struggled to move into a spot where he wouldn't be seen by those inside. He hid inside of a bush as he pulled out a blanket he had taken with him from the orphanage as he covered himself with it. He was out cold almost instantly as he fell asleep and was brought into the nightmares he had of his life up until now. He would stay inside that bush for about a week and a half as he gathered scraps of food from trash bins as well as food pantries around the place. But as soon as he looked at the church, he found it was the one his mother and he would visit from time to time back when he was little. So he decided to enter the building, the feelings of wishing for death to come becoming more and more apparent in the last week and a half brimming to the surface. Stepping in the line to the confession stand, he waited all day for someone to arrive to help him with his issues. It was here that he met Gabriel-sama and how he entered the life of an angel of God and how he continued to try and make his mother proud of himself. Izuku woke up from a seemingly nightmare about a few days after the whole meeting with All Might, Ryukyu, Gabriel, Michiel, and Ichako. He took in deep breaths as he looked around his room as he curled up into a little ball on his bed as tears came down his face. He had the nightmare about his mother dying in front of himself again, except this time All Might was the villain of his story. As he cried silently in his room, he was unaware of the fact that someone was watching him from the crack in his bedroom doors opening. That's it guys. Thanks for watching and supporting us. See you in the next part.